right, good morning, everybody. Good morning, please take your seats. Please move down a bit towards the front if you haven't yet taken your seat. And welcome to the 12th Annual ESPAS Conference. My name is Geraldine Barry. I'm an advisor at the European Commission's Joint Research Centre, and my connection to ESPAS is that I was closely involved in the production, the editing of the Global Trends Report of 2024, so last year's edition. I will say a few words about the conference running order, but after this very first session. At this point, I would like to introduce our opening speakers for the conference today. First, we will have Pascal Leardini, Chair of ESPAS, Deputy Secretary General and Chief Operating Officer of the European Commission. We will move then to Glenn Mikulev, our European Commissioner for Intergenerational Fairness, Culture, Youth and Sport. We do hope that the Vice President Negrescu will join us shortly. And joining us online, we should have Marilena Rauna, Deputy Minister for European Affairs from the Republic of Cyprus. And it's great that you're all here with us. Pascal, I will pass the floor immediately to you.
Thank you so much, Geraldine, and good morning, everyone. I'm very, very pleased to see a packed room for this 12th annual meeting of ESPAS that I have the pleasure of chairing for the time being. And I'm very pleased also to see that two former chair of ESPAS are with us, James Ellis, who is the founding father of ESPAS, and Anne Mettler, who will be a speaker later this morning. It's a great pleasure to see so many people today for a topic which is quite interesting and important for the institution of the European Union. I would like to thank Commissioner Mikulev, Vice President Negrescu, who I understand is on his way, stuck in the traffic somewhere, and Minister Rauna for joining me at this opening session. This is a very important week for ESPAS, because it's the week where we can show what we are doing during the year, producing reflection papers. I hope that you've grabbed 3 papers that have been put at the disposal of the participants today that shows the dynamism of ESPAS and the way we want to be connected to the important political agenda of the European Union. We can safely say that the great interest for today's conference and yesterday technical workshop that was organized by the Committee of the Regions are a key indicator of the vibrant community we have been able to build together. As you know, ESPAS is quite unique. I was yesterday saying that it's one of the rare processes which is not institutionalized. It is based on goodwill. It is based on personal engagement and commitment by all participants. I became chair of ESPAS 18 months ago, and we have tried together to develop the mission and the work during this mandate. We have produced the report last year before the start of this cycle, the political cycle, and we can be pleased to see that some of the ideas which were floating in the Global Trends Report have found some echo in the political priorities of the institutions. I was also recalling that some of the work of the foresight community have found their way in the mainstream political agenda of the institutions. For example, strategic autonomy, which was developed 6 years ago in the foresight community and has become a recurrent theme of our political agenda. Another one more recent is resilience. Resilience, which also was worked out by the foresight community and then labored by the Niinisto report and is now a mainstream activity for all the institutions. The 3 papers that I've mentioned earlier on AI and quantum, on the future of democracy and intergenerational fairness are also attempts to really contribute to the discussion of the main political themes. You will see also in the foyer the results of the Horizon scanning projects run by the Joint Research Centre, which give you insights of the development which matters at the world stage. Turning to the content of today's conference, we have chosen series themes that will play a major role in shaping the long-term future of the European Union up to 2040. we haven't tried to cover every theme or topic. This is not feasible in just one day, but we have tried to line up a very reputable list of speakers which come from different horizons. Another subject of satisfaction for me is that we have been able to attract speakers not only from Europe, but also from the States, from India, from Brazil, and we try to reach out to more. Thinking in a structured way about the future is key added value of ESPAS, and we will try to maintain this. I would like to wish you a warm welcome to this day, and without further ado, I pass the floor to Commissioner Mikalev.
Thank you, Pascal, and good morning, colleagues. It is, for me, a great pleasure to be here today to reflect on the long-term challenges that our future holds, to think about where we want to be in the foreseeable future, but also in 2040. When we create policy, we need to reflect, in my opinion, on three central questions. The first is, what do we learn from experience? What are the lessons that we have learned from past policy? The second question that we need to answer is, what are our needs? What are actually the current needs for which we are designing policy? And the third question that we need to answer, and for me this is the most crucial one, is how does this new policy fit with the future challenges and opportunities that we face? Simply put, is our policy sustainable? ESPAS has a role to play here in allowing us to develop this foresight. Through our interinstitutional cooperation, it allows us to develop a shared understanding of emerging needs, opportunities, challenges, but also risks. And it helps us to adopt this long-term perspective in our policy. The work that ESPAS does alerts us to the need for action, particularly the work that was done in the Global Trends Report. Ahead of this conference, as Pascal mentioned, ESPAS has published 3 policy papers on democracy, on the future of AI, quantum and cybersecurity, and on intergenerational fairness. As the EU's first ever Commissioner for Intergenerational Fairness, I hugely value your cooperation and your input on this theme. And this paper will definitely be a strong contribution to the strategy that I will present next year. Intergenerational fairness and foresight are, to me, 2 sides of the same coin. They cannot be separated. Europe's future will be affected by our significant demographic shifts. And these are shifts that we must adapt to. We need to ensure that our policy builds a prosperous and a fair union for both current and future generations. And intergenerational fairness is essentially about long-term thinking and ensuring that today's decisions do not do any harm to future generations. It's about fostering a renewed engagement between generations so that the young and the old members of our society can stand together rather than be apart. We want to provide young people with opportunities, skills, access to the labor market, and affordable housing, while safeguarding the well-being of older generations through sustainable reforms and inclusive labor market policies. I want this strategy to mark a new mindset in policymaking, one that sees intergenerational fairness considered in all of our policies. And I want it to serve as a platform for flagship initiatives, boosting collaboration across the Commission, reflecting the whole of society approach that it's going to take if we want to overcome the shifts that we face as a society. This is why the strategy will be cross-cutting, touching upon topics from welfare to long-term care, to housing, to social mobility, to climate change, as well as competitiveness. And insofar as timing is concerned, The strategy is scheduled for adoption in the first quarter of 2026 and is being designed with the help of a broad participatory process. In January, we started by consulting representatives from civil society, from academia, and international organizations. We held a call for evidence which was open to citizens and to stakeholders, and now we're in the final phases of a European Citizens Panel on Intergenerational Fairness, which is currently underway. The third and final meeting of 150 randomly selected citizens from across the European Union will take place this weekend. In conclusion, I want to thank every one of you for your participation today. Your unique perspectives and your insights will be key to create an effective and forward-looking policy, and I sincerely look forward to hearing your ideas that will emerge from this conference. I wish you all the very best for these discussions, and thank you for being here.
Good morning, everyone. I will introduce myself, so not to be anonymous. My name is Victor Negrescu, Vice President of the European Parliament, and I'm happy to co-host today's event, and of course also together with the Commission and the other institutions involved to give more visibility to the work that is being conducted by our institution when it comes to foresight. I'm happy to be with all of you today. This morning I was before coming here in the plenary of the European Parliament where we had a debate with President von der Leyen and with the Council about the previous European Council. And I was just noting the fact that many of the topics that were touched upon are actually a part of the work that the foresight teams are working upon. In the previous council, they discussed about artificial intelligence and competitiveness, and we are going to do that today as well. They discussed in the European Council about democratic challenges, and indeed, we are also going to do that today based on the studies that was recently conducted. They also, of course, discussed about social dialogue, about intergenerational fairness, and of course, this is again something that is touched upon in one of the studies that has been conducted by our researchers. Nevertheless, they also discussed about many issues for which we need to anticipate how we are supposed to make decisions, and in the same time making sure that the decision-making process is something that will offer a clear perspective for the future, where we need to evaluate the potential scenarios, see the potential threats, evaluate again the means that are necessary. And in this regard, there are quite a few topics for which we need to again conduct this kind of assessment, meaning enlargement, meaning our investment in defense, meaning our investment in technology, meaning the decision-making process as a whole, meaning how we can engage better citizens. So I strongly believe that what ESPAS is doing really enables decision makers across our institutions to better evaluate the decision-making process, anticipate some of the trends, while in the same time, and this is crucial, address essential questions for the years to come. Because today we discuss a lot about what is happening right now, but we also need to make sure that the legislation and the regulation that we get approved will have an impact in the future. And one of the examples that people refer to when we discuss about foresight is the fact, for instance, that Europe has recently decided to come up with an act on artificial intelligence. And then, this document got approved 2 years ago, and now it's supposed to get implemented. And in the same time, we discuss about postponing or maybe not introducing in the implementation all the provisions, because some of them are already obsolete. This actually shows how important it is to try to make sure that when it comes to EU legislation in particular, we also make sure that when the legislation gets approved, it's something that is also applicable, but something that is tangible and really has an impact once the legislation gets approved, because we all know that the decision-making process at European level takes time, so therefore we need to make sure that the legislation also takes into consideration this period for its implementation. This being said, of course, foresight is not there to tell people what to do. Certainly in the European Parliament it will be difficult to only look at a research study and decide upon that, but clearly offers perspectives. And this is the task that was given to ESPAS, to try to offer different perspectives and again open a conversation between decision makers, but also with the civil society, with different organizations, with member states, with citizens, to try, of course, to have a more integrated reflection process. And opening the reflection, in my opinion, is key, especially right now when we see a mistrust in institutions across member states. So the design of ESPAS is there to enable us to do that. Of course, this process has started a long time ago. We are here at the 12th annual conference, and I hope we will continue to do that for many years to come. Pascal has played a key role in the last couple of years to try to gather us around and to push us in working together. I also need to praise our team in the European Parliament, all the colleagues working actively in showing that the European Parliament, and I'm going to say that, is a leader in the process of foresight, and we will continue to push all the other institutions and all our partners to try to do more, because we strongly believe this is something that is needed for Europe, is needed for the institutions, is needed for decision makers, is needed for citizens as well. This being said, today we have quite a packed schedule with a lot of intervention, a lot of speakers. We want to thank everyone for being involved, for actively getting engaged on the topics that are going to be presented by the different speakers, and we really hope that this annual conference will be again a success, making sure the ESPAS work will continue to be visible and influence decision-making in a positive way. So thank you again for all of you joining today, and I'm happy that together with my friend, Commissioner Mikalev, we are here to again show our support and our commitment to make the foresight activity becoming even more visible and more impactful at European level. Thank you so much.
Now we will pass to our speaker from the Republic of Cyprus, Marlene Rauna.
Thank you very much. Just confirming that you can hear me.
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Very good. Honorable Vice President Negrescu, Commissioner Mikalev, dear Pascal, esteemed guests, I'm absolutely delighted to join you today, albeit virtually from sunny Nicosia, for this timely exchange about strategic foresight and the future of our Union. The diversity of today's audience is precisely what gives this conference real value. With the Cyprus presidency of this Council just around the corner in exactly 48 days today, this is precisely the kind of discussion that is pertinent. Thank you, Commissioner Mikalev, for the welcome and invitation to think together about the kind of Europe we want in the long term, in the world, for our citizens, for our children. We look forward to the upcoming intergenerational strategy. Allow me to also extend my appreciation to ESPAS for its valuable contribution in embedding foresight into policymaking. Strategic foresight will be central to the cooperation of the Ministers for the Future and the EU-wide Foresight Network meeting during the Cyprus presidency. The Cyprus government has, in fact, this year proceeded with the setting up of a national strategic foresight unit, because we need to ensure that the decisions we make today, the policies and legislation we pass, prepare us for tomorrow, that they build resilience. Ladies and gentlemen, the Cyprus presidency comes at a moment of inflection for our Union, for Europe. As we often say, we are navigating a complex, fast-changing geopolitical landscape, in some cases brutally so. We are witnessing a profound shift in the very order that defined the post-World War II era. Since Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine, Europe is no longer the same. This aggression has shattered our long-held assumption, illusion even, that peace in Europe can be taken for granted. From this corner of our Union, here in the southeastern frontier, and from the European Union's last member state that is divided and under occupation, a frontline member state in a volatile region, it is absolutely clear what is at stake. We know that there are no frozen conflicts. We are witnessing not only a war on European soil, but an attack on the very values that have defined us: freedom, sovereignty, democracy, rule of law. The Russian aggression on European soil is forcing us to redesign Europe's security architecture, to build up, to build better. It is now painfully clear that Europe must be ready to protect itself and its citizens, building our defense capabilities, investing more in our security, including maritime security, protecting our critical infrastructure, technology and information security, building up our geopolitical presence in a tangible way, including through robust trade partnerships, building up socioeconomic and environmental resilience. In essence, removing our strategic dependencies. For many years, we debated, almost philosophically, how to strengthen Europe's strategic autonomy. The Russian war against Ukraine has made that debate obsolete. European autonomy is no longer debatable. It is no longer optional, and it is no longer theoretical. It is an imperative that we need to deliver on. Because this war has made our dependencies existential, from security and defense to competitiveness, trade, energy, interconnectivity, innovation. It is glaringly obvious that long-term resilience and autonomy go hand in hand. Ultimately, what we're discussing today is how Europe can stand taller for itself, protecting and projecting its values, forging bold partnerships in a turbulent, shifting world. But values today must be merged with interests. In a shifting world that appears to erode our founding principles, the Union must continue to stand out as a stable, reliable, strong actor that upholds multilateralism and international law. Autonomy and being open to the world are not contradictory. They are complementary. To stand on our own, from security, defense, trade, energy, we must be extrovert, outward-looking, and interconnected, engaging with our partners on equal terms in a 360-degree manner. Our unwavering support to Ukraine must and will continue on all fronts, because they're fighting a war for their territorial integrity, but in doing so, fighting a war for Europe. It is a litmus test for Europe's security. At the same time, if we truly aspire to be a global power, we must deepen partnerships across the world. Europe's southeastern neighborhood, the Gulf, Cyprus's immediate region must not escape our attention in this exercise, because this region is essential to achieving our union's long-term strategic goals, from energy diversification and clean energy to trade autonomy, enhanced competitiveness, strengthened security and maritime stability, tackling migration and climate resilience. This region must be part of the equation. The wider Middle East and Gulf is vital for the European Union because it is inextricably linked with Europe's long-term security and prosperity. And Cyprus, lying at the European Union's southeasternmost corner, has consistently and reliably served as a bridge in advancing this potential. We stand here in the Eastern Mediterranean as the European Union's lighthouse, from crisis response to humanitarian aid to non-combatant evacuation. Cyprus has been and will continue to be part of the solution to the region's challenges. And through Cyprus, the European Union has a footprint in the Eastern Mediterranean. Enlargement, too, is a strategic imperative, a geopolitical investment and a necessity. From the Western Balkans to Ukraine and Moldova, enlargement is about reunifying Europe. It is about expanding our space of peace, stability, and security. Ladies and gentlemen, the next multi-annual financial framework must become the vehicle to deliver on our strategic priorities. And it must be flexible in responding to existing, but also future challenges. It must allow us to deliver on a Europe that is competitive, able to lead in the world, resilient and autonomous, a European Union that does things simpler, smarter, and faster, and that enables its citizens to thrive, innovate, and do business. This is the vision that the Cyprus presidency will pursue with ambition and pragmatism as an honest broker and working closely with the European Parliament across the board. Ladies and gentlemen, dear Commissioner, dear Vice President, shaping the Europe we want for the future begins with the choices we make today. And in doing so, we must be bold to turn this moment of challenge into an opportunity, because what is on the rise is a new Europe. Thank you very much, and I very much look forward to welcoming many of you to Cyprus in the 181 days Cyprus will be at the helm of the Council.
Thank you so much to our distinguished opening panel for setting the scene so well and for indeed giving us the scale of the challenges. Now, my immediate challenge is to try and keep the show on the road. We have a very packed schedule. For those, you'll find the conference program, if you haven't yet found it, by scanning the QR code at the back of the participants list, for those of you in the room, but I assume you already have. Ditto the Wi-Fi connection is at the back of the participant list. We will seek your views during the day at various points using Slido. Do get ready to vote when we ask you for that. We will try and have a coffee break at 10:45 sharp. So again, we will need to move swiftly on. Please come back in time after that. Lunch will be from 1 to 2. And otherwise, we hope you enjoy the conference, and particularly also those of you not yet in this room, but those of you who are joining us online throughout the day. So with no further ado, I would like to invite our next set of speakers to come to the floor, and I thank again to our excellent opening remarks. So now we will have Belén Martínez Carbonell, Secretary General of the European External Action Service. Also joining her will be Radmila Shekerinska, Deputy Secretary General of NATO. And this will be a type of in conversation with, but it'll be very ably moderated by Rosa Balfour, Director of Carnegie Europe here in Brussels. So once you're ready, please do come to the stage. Yeah, the names just need to be, one name needs to be replaced, that's all. So Rosa and colleagues, please do come. I know they're all in the building, so that's not a worry. Here they are, great. Right. Okay, so over to you.
Good morning. And welcome to this session. This conference is called Europe 2040, and we're going to be focusing on security. And this is the only session that is really explicitly focusing on security. And I couldn't be joined by two better speakers for this. Now, I want to go straight to our issues. Today, European security, and this is since 2022, of course, really runs through Ukraine. And Europeans have done quite a lot. I mean, thinking back to 2020, I think it was unthinkable where Europe is today in terms of supporting Ukraine. So I'd like to start by asking Radmila Shekerinska, who's the Deputy Secretary General of NATO, just to give us, where we are in just a few words, where we are in terms of supporting Ukraine and NATO policy in this regard, before turning to Belén Martínez Carbonell, who's the Secretary General of the External Action Service, with the same question. Please.
Well, thank you, Rosa, and good morning, everyone. Just 4 months ago, NATO leaders met in The Hague, and there was a very clear sense of urgency with regards to the situation in Ukraine, but also with regards to our present and future defense challenges. After long discussions before the summit and at the summit, I do believe historic decisions were made. And they practically referred to the three priorities that we have really focused on. The first one was increase of defense spending so that our deterrence and defense can be strong and hold. Second, increase of defense production, because you don't defend with percentages of GDP. You defend yourself with clear and visible and realistic capabilities. And the third one was the support of Ukraine. And the three are very interconnected, and we cannot do without any one of them. So there was a clear sense of urgency and need for unity. It was the unity that our citizens need. It is the unity that our adversaries fear. And the decisions that were made are now the focus of our attention. So I think that especially on supporting Ukraine immediately after the summit, there was a strong focus by the NATO Secretary General on getting essential US equipment, which is in the stockpiles and available, financed by European allies and Canada, delivered to Ukraine with the speed of relevance. And this is actually our focus very much this year. A number of allies have already delivered on their packages, the equipment, especially air defense, ammunition, essential, existential, not actually essential, existential issues are being delivered to Ukraine. And more importantly, we are also planning ahead for the last month and for 2026. The total package for 2026 is planned at 12 billion euros, 12 billion US dollars. Majority of NATO allies have either already contributed or have announced their contributions at the last defense ministerial. And this is very much in the focus because the security of Ukraine is actually our first line of defense. And what happens in Ukraine reflects directly on our deterrence and defense.
Thank you very much. And Belén, the role of the European Union is also unprecedented in contributing to this effort. Can you just give us, in pills again, what has been done? it doesn't need to be turned on.
Okay. I mean, the first thing that I see looking at the three of us is that it looks very female. And I would read it all hands on deck. That's how I would read this. I think this is such an existential issue for Europe that it requires everybody and every project to take into account the security threat that the Russian aggression has put upon us. And that's how I will read this, that how interlink the security of Ukraine is with the security of Europe. And a lot of, I would say, no stone has left unturned in Ron-Punshumand to provide for this. This has been turned into a Europe's moment of independence when it comes also into building our own security. And it's not by coincidence that you see the massive effort to support Ukraine with a massive efforts to scale up Europe of defense. And the defense readiness roadmap goes in that direction, goes in the direction of providing Europe with a strategic autonomy, providing Europe with the capacity to feeling, in particular for those 23 EU member states that are part of NATO, the commitments that they have to do. But some of these no stone unturned examples that I would like to put to you is that we have done things that we wouldn't have thought a few years ago. We have trained more than 82,000 Ukrainian soldiers with European instruments to be ready to be fit for combat in Ukraine. We have completed by 80% our pledge to deliver 2 million rounds of large caliber ammunition. Some of us who've been in institutions for many years, we would have thought this was inconceivable. The European funds will be turned into buying military support. And we have put these massive investments in defense industrial cooperation with Ukraine, including the work that is now going on the Drone Alliance. And for us, as I said, this is a strong Europe means a strong Ukraine and vice versa. And the future of Ukraine in this regard is very much linked to the security guarantees that Europe can provide for Ukraine. And these security guarantees are very much linked to the political project that is Ukraine's membership of Europe. And there we advancing quite fast on the enlargement agenda. We have a problem with, it's not a secret, one member state blocking the progress in the Council. But the future for Ukraine is closely linked to Europe, and I think that's another part of the agenda. And then the third question is that what we are facing in Ukraine is a test of the wars of the future. We need to fight Russia with different means. They fight us with hybrid wars. We need to fight back with means that we were unconceived also in the future. And a good example, again, is all the work that we are doing with European means and in good partnership with allies on fighting the shadow fleet. Because as you know, one of our targets about fighting Russia is fighting its war economy. And this we fight on different fronts. And the shadow fleet is a good front where to fight them. Because this is the shadow fleet that carries those Russian oil revenues that we want to cut down to cut its war economy. So as I said, it's a war of the future is being tested in Ukraine.
Thank you very much. You've mentioned war of the future and also the prospect for Ukraine's accession to the EU. And of course, last week, the enlargement reports were published. I'd just like both of you to just think a little bit about European agency, because since there's been a change of administration in the United States, the sort of strategic leadership direction really needs to come from Europe. And, you know, the vehicle for that is not just the EU, it's not just NATO, it's also NATO-EU cooperation. So perhaps can I ask you a little bit, and thinking also of these hybrid operations such as the Shadow Fleet and other areas, can I ask you a little bit about NATO-EU cooperation and how that's functioning? Belén, please, you continue.
I think we will be kind of explaining the same thing from different sides of the mirror. But I think through all of this, we have, as I said, set up a lot of tools. But at the end of the day, it's all about development, this European pillar of NATO. And how can Europe, and in particular the 23 member states that are part of NATO, contribute to achieve those NATO targets? NATO and EU are kind of closest partners, and the efforts in Ukraine demonstrate this. First, as I said, the Defense Readiness Roadmap has very concrete targets and objectives that fit those of the alliance. It's the European Drone Defense Initiative, the Eastern Flank WASH, watch, the European Air Shield, the European Space Shield, all these fits into the targets and the objectives that NATO has set for itself. We have big initiatives when it comes to funding that will contribute to meet those NATO targets. The Commission initiative SAFE, Security Action for Europe, with an initiative of 150 billion potential loans for member states that are being discussed as we speak, with action plans being submitted by the end of this month. That is a huge boost to European capacity to defend itself and thus contribute to the NATO targets. And then it's the multiplying effect that all these investments will have in Europe capacity in closing our capability gaps, which are very important, where we don't want to duplicate structures with NATO, but we need to also develop our side of the story. It's on our investment pledges that we're doing, contributing, as I said, to the European pillar of NATO. All this is super important, and I think that we have constant dialogue, technical level and at all levels, to make sure that our projects match each other, also through the good work of the European Defence Agency.
And Radmila, also I'm thinking about the Coalition of the Willing, which has been playing a pivotal role in managing the relationship with the United States and in providing leadership. And of course that includes non-EU members who are NATO members. So how does that work? How can one make sure that this constellation of institutions and leadership actually fosters European agency in this matter?
Well, I would argue that NATO and EU are partners, really exquisite type of partners throughout the years, even in times of peace. But in times when our security is challenged, there is actually no alternative. So we cooperate practically in a number of domains, from, I don't know, maritime security to military mobility. We have teams, we have expertise, we interact on many of these issues, but I think what's more important is that we have a clear decision from the leadership that we really want to cooperate by using the advantages that both organizations bring into this partnership. Without duplication, with a lot of focus on complementarity. I mean, in the course of just this year, we have had the Defense Commissioner, Defense and Space Commissioner several times. We'll have Belén at the beginning of next year. We had other commissioners joining us. Very, very clear view that in times of need, we need to focus on what we do the best. Therefore, in dealing with security, what we bring to the table is very much the military competence, the capabilities discussions, the standards, interoperability, while we do count on the EU not only to support allies and our efforts in terms of financial means, as Belén has mentioned, but also on issues where your expertise is strong. Resilience, military mobility, just to name the few. What I believe is essential in this partnership is that both in the Coalition of the Willing, this is very visible, but especially when developing the defense industrial base, which we consider to be really one of the three priorities, is not to avoid additional barriers. Because actually our European security depends, on Europe being more ambitious, taking the lead, especially in the domain of conventional deterrence, but also not creating obstacles that will avoid allies bringing something to the table. I do believe European security cannot profit if we leave aside the contributions from both security but also industrial production of the US, UK, Turkey, Norway. So our strong position on this is let's try and develop a much stronger transatlantic industry defense base, because what we see on the other side is we see not only Russia turning into a war economy and really focusing on financing this war machine, but also Russia being enabled by cooperation in the military domain with China, Iran, North Korea. There is absolutely no excuse for us not bringing the maximum of cooperation to the table and creating even additional obstacles that will make our production weaker and our potential for the future much at stake.
I'd like to turn now to the theme of this conference, which is really, foresight and Europe 2040. I mean, what we're doing now, we've seen very rapid move towards building up European security and defense, but it's being conducted under duress. But still, it's foundational to whatever's going to look like, whatever European security is going to look like in 2040. So can I ask you, amid the rush and the need to fortify European defences at a time of military threat, what of this is going to be foundational to what European ability to protect its own territory, both in conventional ways and in less conventional ways in 2040? Or, perhaps to put it more briefly, what is there, or what does a European way to security look like? Radmila, would you like to start?
I wouldn't dare talking on behalf of, just a European view, but let's say, let's talk about how we see it in NATO. There is no, unfortunately, single bullet for, solving security challenges. This did not happen in the past. It is not true now for any country, any continent, including ours. But this is why we don't believe in single bullets. But with the risk of sounding boring, we have offered a triad of solutions. And this is, we really need to increase defense spending. And when we talk about increased defense spending, especially in Europe and Canada, someone, I think, said burden sharing is not writing a check and invoicing, your security. That's not a realistic option. The first time I joined NATO defense ministers was when my country was still not part of NATO, but we have joined sessions for Afghanistan because we were contributing to the mission there. And I remember even at sessions discussing Afghanistan, we would have the same repetition of statements. We would have a US Secretary of Defense saying European allies and Canada need to do more, and then many of European ministers and Canada saying yes, but not now. And this is not a reoccurring theme from 2017 when I heard it for the first time. It is a reoccurring theme since the creation of the alliance. So people quote President Eisenhower talking about this. So I do believe that this is the time to actually turn this burden sharing from a problem, let's say, into an opportunity for all. And, building European capabilities, investing in your own security, it is important for the alliance. I do believe it is important for both sides of the Atlantic. Secondly, on defense production, I already mentioned, at the beginning of this year, we struggled even with basic production such as ammunition. If I remember correctly, I think Russia was outperforming us 4 times. That was unacceptable. But I think that especially on the issue of ammunition, it is clear that when there is a political will, when we make up our minds and when we are dedicated to what we have said is our commitment, there are results. So on the issue of ammunition, we have closed the gap in the course of 1 year. So if we're focused, if we are determined, if there is a resolve in us, clearly these are formidable economies and incredible industries that we have. So we now need to do the same when it comes to more sophisticated equipment. When it comes to not only the typical primes and their products, but also when it comes to new technology. So our focus is very much how can we support the industry to outproduce our competitors, but also continue to out-innovate them. And this is why Eastern Century, the new activity that our SACEUR has initiated, is focused on protecting the Eastern flank for new challenges, but also very much moving forward on innovation. And this is where we work very well with our Ukrainian partners. And I fully agree with Belén. This is a two-way street. We support them, but actually we learn a lot. And the third part is, if we cannot send the message to Putin that we stand by Ukraine, he will not really believe our words also when it comes to our security. So in a way, we talk a lot about increasing posing strategic dilemmas to Russia. It's all of these things together. him seeing that we are producing, that we are investing in our defense, but also seeing that we show unity along the way, and we continue to support Ukraine, either be it through sanctions, decisions on frozen assets, but also very much the announcements and the continued military equipment flowing towards Ukraine through Pearl and other initiatives.
So, Belén, and before we open it up for questions, same question to you, but just, we've talked about strength, we've talked about defense, we've talked about conventional deterrence, we've talked about innovation, hybrid, eastern flank. What else would you add to, the building blocks of what is being done now that are going to, transform Europe and, looking forward to 2040, what can we imagine Europe to look like in terms of security and defense? 2040, 15 years from now.
2040 is a very long time, in particular at the speed of the world these days. But so it's very arrogant to try to anticipate, but I'll make a little effort. I think that what we will see is that we've heard the call of the allies, and Radmila was saying now is the moment. And I couldn't agree more with Radmila that we have to turn this into an opportunity. Investment in security and defense, because we need to be more autonomous, can also be an opportunity for Europe to grow economically, because this is an area where a lot of funding will be invested, and there are opportunities for European industries, for European companies to invest, ideally in sync with Ukraine, because it's a double win. And I think these will open a lot of the innovation, and we see that the majority of the technologies are dual-use technologies. And if the wars of the future are going to be fought with drones, AI, and things that I can't imagine what is going to be there in 2040, I think none of us can. I think we won't win the war on quantity elements vis-a-vis the Chinese or the Russians or the Americans, because they're very good at production, at bulk, and numbers. But what I do think we can have an edge, competitive edge, is on technology and innovation. So that's my first point. And these will help us also to grow, because we need economic growth with a view to stand by ourselves. Secondly, the economic security, which very intrinsically linked to defense and security. We also need to have those means to fight those hybrid wars. And that means, the Commission is preparing this Resource Europe and, boosting European economic security, European economic autonomy, because a lot of what we'll see in trade wars, in critical raw materials, fight for the critical raw materials, all these will have a huge impact also on our capacity to defend ourselves, because we'll need those critical raw materials to be able to build our defense industry. So everything is really interlinked. And then, so that will be the second axe where I think we will be hopefully better and smarter. And the third is that notwithstanding, the world getting more aggressive and people there to fight for themselves, I think there's still value on partnerships. And I hope that will be still the European way to look at the world. We have sped up the number of security and defense partnerships that we do with different countries. The discussions we are having on SAFE with UK and Canada are a sign that we look at close partners, and we see the need to engage with them. And of course, first and foremost will be those in our neighborhood, and there again, accession will make Europe stronger, because there will be more countries being part of Europe. But then we look at our second layer of neighborhood, and everything that happens in the northern Mediterranean region, the Middle East, broader Middle East, will have an impact of that. Whatever happening in India, which is really a rising power, and that's what we're making such an effort to have closer relationships with India. There are all these emerging powers with whom we share many parts of the agenda. It's not going to be, I tied up a knot with Europe, I buy you full. It's going to be more interested relations on sectoral issues. But I think we, again, need to look at the world that is getting more aggressive, and we need to see with each partner where our interests coincide and do partnerships with them. And again, there, I think Europe has a good record of engaging with the rest of the world. But we soon will be the the only one standing there looking for allies. So let's make again an opportunity out of the current geopolitical context.
Thank you very much. So economic growth, economic security and global partnerships. And that's this sort of summary of the European way. Let me open it up to questions and comments from the audience. I'm going to bunch them. So I have one gentleman here. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves. And I'm also going to ask, while I do this, I'm going to ask the organizers to let me know how much time do we have left, because we started a little bit late. So, sorry? 15 minutes, great. So we actually have time for some good questions. So let me ask this gentleman to start, and I'm scanning the room for more hands up, please.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you very much to both speakers. I am Patrick Chevalreau, Open Diplomacy Institute, Paris. I have myself worked a lot of time within the NATO common structure, and I am very worried about the security of Europe now. NATO has a military leg, which is very credible with the NATO common structure, exercises, defense plans, interoperability, standards. It has also a political leg. I'm sorry to be blunt, but with the Trump's administration being at the minimum in an ambiguity and to be very pessimistic, lining up with Moscow, since months now, where is the political leg of NATO now?
Thank you very much. Now, there were two hands here. Okay, the lady first and then the gentleman.
Thank you. My name is Pascal Juncker from the Ministry of the Economy in Luxembourg. I would like to ask the speakers questions about energy and resources for this defense. So Europe is an energy poor and a resources poor continent. More energy will go in AI. Where in the future are we taking that extra energy and those extra resources from to build up that defense and turn that budget into material? Turning that budget into material, my second question would be, can we not in that defense budget also have a defense by adapting the European continent to climate change, which is another threat? And if we don't have that, then what are we fighting wars for?
Thank you very much. And please, yeah.
Yes, I'm Bert Wilde from the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I don't know whether you're familiar with the Czech documentary "Change My Mind," in which focuses on people that have totally different beliefs. Whether it goes about whether we're talking about the truth in Ukraine, and I'm wondering how are we going to address this and this post-truth society is winning in elections. How are we going to address this in the period up to 2040? And is this not also something for NATO or the EU to address, apart from having all military industrial capabilities in order? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have two political questions and one related to energy. Who would like to? Radmila, please go ahead.
Let me go in the same order that the questions were asked. We do get a lot of questions about the US commitment. And we have had Secretary General really focused, as is the role of every Secretary General, on making the transatlantic link and relationship the best we have and the best we can, because we do believe that this is the strength of the alliance. The fact that we bring forward the European capabilities, European commitment, but also US and Canada's commitment. And there was, in all of his interactions, and he has had quite a few, there was a very clear line. The US is committed to NATO, but the commitment comes paired with an expectation. And this expectation is Europe and Canada stepping up. And I spoke about this before, so I will not go into the details. But let me tell you, there was a very clear signal along those lines at the ministerial meetings, a very clear signal in The Hague. I know that many people were expecting a different outcome. The Hague summit was historic because we have shown to our adversaries that they cannot sow divisions among us. And it is clear in all our interactions with the Congress. We have an overwhelming support in US Congress for the alliance. And we see it in all opinion polls, apropos the questions of winning the minds and the hearts, in asking the American people of their views towards NATO. So the question that you have asked is a question that media analyzed. We have addressed this issue. But the question is, how can we invest even more in a transatlantic relationship that works? And we believe that the 3 decisions in The Hague are the answer in this. Supporting Ukraine, we are doing it with EU money and the US available equipment. This is also one of the recipes, by investing in defense production and by investing in our own security. So I think it is a fair expectation from their side as well. When it comes to the other 2 questions, I mean, my political background would love to have a separate discussion on changing minds, and I agree, it's a formidable dilemma that we face. Both issues are issues on which we have views, we have discussions, but we do believe that EU has more expertise. And we try to focus on the tracks where we are stronger. You know, military capabilities, investing in command and control, enablers, things like this. But we do analyze energy issues because they are the enabling factor that connects the dots. We will need energy to support increased defense production. We will need energy to support our commands, our military exercises. On all of these issues, being dependent in the energy domain has turned into a security challenge. We have been dependent on Russian energy for too long. We have seen naivete a bit on the issue of energy dependency. Europe has moved dramatically in that respect. I will not go into, but we also have to be aware that we should not create new energy dependencies, especially because of the attempts to do more on the climate front, but knowing that the majority of this equipment is produced in China. So shifting from one dependency to the other is not the smart thing to do when it comes to our security. And let me mention this as a connection between these 2 questions. These also are related to issues of resilience. How do we approach divisions in our society which can be amplified which are being amplified, let's face it, by our adversaries? How do we fight them? And this is why the 5% pledge was not part of just the big negotiations. We have calculated at the end of last year that we need at least 3.5% of GDP focused entirely on military capabilities relating to our defense plans. But we also said there is more to security than just the military capabilities. And this is why we added the extra 1.5% that can go into resilience, military mobility, supporting defense production, all these enabling elements. So on these issues, we really trust allies to, in a way, pick the areas where they can do more and focus on them. So although I would love to have the discussion on how to influence minds in the right and responsible manner, but unfortunately, we neither have the time nor the mandate for this.
But Belén, maybe at the External Action Service, things have been accomplished on this front.
Not sure anything has been accomplished because the order of the challenge, it will take a while before we say mission completed. But maybe three elements to complement what Radmila said. To Patrick, on the relation with the US. I think it's a difficult relation that we will need to manage. But I think 5 months or 6 months ago, nobody would have thought that we would be where we are today. I think our leadership has managed to manage that relation relatively well. both in terms of the trade negotiations, where I think our negotiators have proven to be the best in the world, all things relative, because of course it's the context in which they're negotiating. Also because if we remember Alaska, no one would have betted that today the US would be imposing those huge sanctions on Russian oil companies. So things are turning, maybe not is what we would have wished to ask for the US, but things are in a better place that some people would have feared a few months ago. To Pascal on energy, and you mentioned also climate change. I think with that you give us the answer. I think Europe's answer to that comes on three levels. First, our energy dependencies and diversifying, and this is the first lesson we draw from the Russian aggression, diversifying our energy sources, and I think we've done quite a good effort there. Also cutting dependencies from other actors, not just on Russia, but the word there is diversifying. Secondly, is clean energy, and that opens a broad scope of energies that you could use. But I think there Europe has a positive edge where we have advanced a lot on cutting our dependencies from fossil fuels, and that will make us stronger. And then third, partnerships, and here I go back to the critical raw materials and the number of partnerships that we're establishing with third countries to make sure that we can also have our different sources of critical raw materials, diversifying and extracting them in a way that it's smarter and more constructive than some other big players. And then to Bart, I haven't watched the documentary. It's interesting. I'll try to have a look. But again, here I would see different elements to how to address that, in the knowledge that this is probably one of the most challenging issues. First, we have again been learning since 2014 how to fight disinformation and foreign interference and manipulation of information. It's a tall order. And it's a very difficult battle that goes there behind the scenes in the social media. But I think we are working on it, and we are making good progress, and particularly learning from others. Second, the Commission just put out these Democracy Shield proposals on the table, and you will find a lot of ideas there on how to improve society's resilience on different fronts. And thirdly, I think it's by making sure that our leaders deliver to societies on all fronts, and in particular on economic growth. And, our leaders are accountable compared to other leaders out there in other countries. And they need to prove to voters that they listen to their needs and they respond to their priorities. And the majority of the priorities of our voters are economic priorities. So the fact that leaders had a discussion at the last European Council on housing, it's a sign that leaders are listening to people, and that's how best you can defend European democracy, is a democracy that delivers to the citizens.
Thank you very much. Do we have time for another couple of questions, or not really? Okay, so please join me in thanking our speakers for this session.
Thank you so much. That was a fascinating, really stimulating conversation. Okay, thank you very much to our Secretary General, our Deputy Secretary General, and to Rosa for such fantastic moderation. We now break for coffee. We shall see you back in the room promptly, I hope at 11 o'clock. And our next session will follow indeed the theme, but we will be looking at the world in 2040 and what role for Europe. See you back then, and for those of you online, see you as well. Welcome back then. Thank you. away. Right, welcome back, everybody. Please take your seats. Thank you. Do come into the room again. I know the conversations have been brilliant. We got off to a really good start with some very stimulating discussion this morning. And welcome to those of you again joining us or rejoining us online. So it's my pleasure now to introduce the third session already of the morning. The World in 2040, what role for Europe? And that actually follows very logically on from our last conversation. So joining us online from London, we have Mark Leonard, Director of the European Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome, Mark. Joining us from New Delhi, Professor Rudra Chowdhury, Director of Carnegie India. Also very welcome. And here in the room, Heather Grab, I think a known face, certainly around Brussels and in these sessions, currently Senior Fellow at Bruegel, and Jim Kloos, our moderator for today. You're very welcome, Jim. Also, an old friend of ESPAS, and a very strong supporter of ESPAS, but currently Secretary General of the Trans-European Policy Studies Association. Jim, I'll pass straight over to you for what I hope will be a great session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be back at ESPAS. I was present at the creation with James Ellis and a few other people, so very happy to be here. I don't think I have to labor the point that we are facing enormous challenges right now. I don't remember any time in Brussels where we faced that many challenges. And the interesting or worrisome thing is that all of those challenges pose new questions to the EU and its DNA. So for me, the big question, if you talk about 2040, is can the European Union adapt while preserving its DNA? And you've just introduced the three panelists, so I don't have to do it. I'm pleased that I have someone sitting next to me. Heather, thank you very much. Let's get straight into business. And as I said, we'll try to work on the 2040 perspectives. I'll start with Mark. You know, I read an article you co-authored in January this year. You said, strategic interdependence is more than a policy framework. It's a mindset, one that Europe's leaders must embrace if they are to navigate the world as it is, not as they wish it to be. The choice is clear: adapt or get left behind. So my question is, how do you see this adaptation process? What are the prospects for a coherent EU policy looking to 2040? And I would like you to also include a few remarks about the transatlantic relationship, because it's so fundamental to all of our policies. So please, Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's a huge pleasure to be with you virtually. I'm very sorry that I'm not in the room with you, sitting next to you on one of those chairs. But I think this is a really important discussion. And as you say, I think the most interesting question about Europe, if you look towards 2040, is not how well we've done on individual policy areas, whether we've implemented all the Draghi letter or other kind of reports yet, the 5 kind of big strategic frameworks that have come out, but whether we're thinking about things in a way that is likely to lead to policy which will help us in the future. And I think the starting point has to be a really clear-eyed understanding of how much the world has changed. And it's extraordinarily difficult for Europeans because our basic mindset is based on really sort of leaning into the world that was born after the end of the Cold War, where we had a vision of how you could build interdependence between countries that had been enemies beforehand, with France and Germany being the kind of archetype, and that could create a kind of substructure on which you built a political superstructure, which would change the nature of international relations and foreign policy. And that was fundamentally shattered, that belief that interdependence was a source of peace and stability by the war, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And it built on some cracks which have been building up in that worldview in the years beforehand. But I think it has led to a kind of different way of thinking about interdependence and about international relations. I wrote a book a couple of years ago called The Age of Unpeace, and that argued not just that the age of peace was over, but that the kind of borders between war and peace had been eroded. And I use a kind of metaphor to describe international relations. And the metaphor I use is of a marriage which has gone really badly wrong, but where the couple can't get divorced. And like in a marriage, it's all the things that brought them together in the good times that people use to hurt each other in the bad times. So in a marriage, it's the shared holiday home, it's the pets, but it's above all the children that get manipulated and get used to inflict harm on the other side of the relationship. And in geopolitics, it's all the things which are going to create one world of globalization. So trade, which is no longer something that brings us together, but it's something that's being manipulated through sanctions, export controls, investment screening, other things. Migration is no longer something which brings us together. It's something which is being weaponized and used to kind of manipulate internal politics. Energy is something which can be cut off. The internet is something which can lead to election interference and cyber attacks, etc. And that kind of means that's the idea behind strategic interdependence. Europe can't cut itself off from the rest of the world. We need to have relationships with other countries to get rare earths, to get energy, to get technology, to get all sorts of other things. But we can't be blind to the dangers that come out of being overly dependent on different countries. And we're in a situation now where we're under coercion from our 2 biggest trading partners, China and the US. And we are trying to move from that situation towards one where we are able to write our own story and to have some sovereignty and some control over our future. I think actually we've done a lot better than many people might have expected. If you go back to 2022, I think that this change in mindset has taken place. I think in a whole series of different areas, we're starting to think about our future in a very different way. Security is obviously the kind of most important, the most challenging, the most existential, and the most difficult because our dependence with the US is so extreme. And we're in this terrible situation where, on the one hand, we've built all of our assumptions around security around a transatlantic relationship which doesn't exist anymore and can't exist in the future. But at the same time, nobody wants to do anything which will further undermine the credibility of Article 5. So it's a delicate dance where people are spending 70-80% of their time managing Trump in a tactical way. But we are starting to put in place things, like the roadmap and the omnibus and things like that. And you've seen this kind of huge surge in defense spending, and what's happening in Germany is kind of truly remarkable. I think on trade, again, we started to develop a different mindset. We've put instruments in place like the anti-coercion instrument. We're starting to think about economic relationships, not just in terms of what benefits consumers, but as a security issue as well. But the response has been underwhelming so far. Most people are not super impressed by the way that we dealt with Trump's tariffs. There's a big challenge from China at the moment, and this anti-coercion instrument, which has been kind of painstakingly implemented, has not been used yet. And I was in Beijing a couple of weeks ago, and I think we have a real crisis of credibility there as a result of the way that we dealt with Trump and his tariffs. It's partly because they don't really understand that our situation is not identical to theirs because of this security relationship that we're in. Anyway, and that you can look at other areas. Enlargement is another area. I think it's pretty difficult to see how we can enlarge the European Union in the classic way that we did in the future. At the same time, no one wants to leave Ukraine and Moldova and other countries hanging between a European sphere of influence and a Russian sphere of influence. So we need to rethink how you have Europe as a kind of existential community of fate on security issues. And that also has implications for the relationship with the UK, which we're really struggling with at the moment on both sides of the channel. And then there is a kind of global question about what kind of relationships you want in the world. I think Europeans massively overestimated not just the efficiency of the international system, but also its legitimacy in different places. And I think many, Europeans were quite surprised at how relaxed much of the rest of the world was about Trump's election. We did an opinion poll in 24 countries, which showed that most people in most places thought that Trump would be good for their country, good for America, and good for global peace. And that's because they're really happy about America becoming a normal country rather than speaking as some kind of moral arbiter for the world and being the leader of a kind of international system. And they want to have more space in it. And that does have kind of fundamental implications for the international liberal order, which Europeans relied on so heavily on. But, we're going to hear from Rudra later on. But I think one of the key things here is to think less in institutional terms about the world and more about building a whole set of different partnerships. But the big challenge, I think, in all of this is for Europeans not to become the champions of the world of yesterday that has already died and to be in a kind of preservationist mindset, but instead to actually lean into these quite profound changes and to see how we can be a different kind of partner for countries like India, countries like Korea, like Japan, that are also having to deal with quite similar situations where, on the one hand, they have really valued their relationship with the US in economic and security terms, but at the same time, they have profound questions about how reliable the US is in the future, and they're looking for different sorts of relationships. So I think that, that kind of big revolution in our mindset has started. Obviously, the glass is at best half full in each of these different areas, but I think we've got a sense of what the main building blocks are of what an alternative approach is. My suspicion is that Europe will look fundamentally different in the 2040s to what it looks like in the 2020s, both because of the mindset that is changing in these different areas, but also I think the whole idea of the EU as a community will be quite different.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks. I think we have to stop here because I think we have some other speakers and you've said a lot of things. It's a nice transition towards Rudra. One of the important things is we sometimes have a tendency in Brussels to be inward-looking. From everything you say, it is so important that we understand also the views from outside, and particularly from such an important country as India, which is confronted also with many questions about its own geopolitical situation. And Rudra, in a podcast by the ECFR last month, you talked about the visit to New Delhi of the EU Commission. And you said, this was a geopolitical moment to strike a deal with the EU. And that is a golden opportunity for both sides. Since then, the new strategic EU-India agenda has been published in September, endorsed by the European Council. Now, are we on the brink of a new geopolitical relationship between the EU and India? And how do you see that also against the background of the Chinese and American challenges we are facing? Thank you.
Jim, thanks a lot, and it's great to be with all of you, and thanks to ESPAS. Look, if there was a moment where the EU and India could actually strike something that could be everlasting into 2040 and beyond, it's now. This is, we love, as political scientists, we love saying this is the moment, but this actually is the moment. And I think the moment is driven by three factors, apart from many others, but three primary factors to my mind. One, which is no surprise to anybody, but it's the United States, right? There is a commonality now in the challenge of the United States. Now, at some level, the relationship between India and the US may get better on operational issues, tactical issues. The US president may come to India early next year. There may be a Quad meeting. At an operational level, the EU will have a renewed approach to the United States at some level. But I think strategically, something has fallen off the bottom. And I don't think that's going to be replaced very easily. And when something falls off the bottom, you look not just to hedge, but to rebalance in a way. Now, for India, the United States continues to be the most consequential relationship for a variety of market, economic, technological, and defense reasons. But I think because the trust has kind of fallen off the bottom, there is a huge impulse for a rebalance. And if you look at the rebalance, the question for India is, who do you rebalance with? To me, the European Union provides the best bet for that rebalance, right? And it's going to be a struggle. It's not that just because there's an atomicity of interests, the two are going to come together, right? And at some level, I think Indian leaders are going to look to countries like Russia with a renewed interest, and that's just and that's going to be the paradox that we're going to have to figure out, right? So you're going to rebalance. The dependent variable for rebalance is the United States, but you're going to look to Europe and you're going to look to Russia, and you're going to have to find a way to square that. So that's one. Two, I think there's a general sense that there is a higher degree of pragmatism that has kicked into Brussels, which seems to be very much alive in this particular presidency, and it's been vocalized in many different forms. I don't think the pragmatism was only because of the United States, but I think it was partially also because the war in your front yard, actually, not even in your backyard, right? So there is an alignment, and I think that alignment has come together for the first time in any period of time. Now, does that mean what is going to be required for the EU and India to actually cement this alignment and take the strategic alignment forward to 2040 and onwards? I think three things. One, we just have to get this free trade agreement done between the two sides, right? It's stuck on 2-3 key issues, I believe now, 2-3 key documents, or whatever the operational issues are. But if we're serious about this alignment, my sense is that there will be a big visit early next year, European Union visit. There will be a summit next year. We want to align it in a way in which the FTA is done, number one. Number two, Jim, you mentioned this new agenda that's been entered between India and the EU in September of this year, which is great. And it's good that both sides are articulating their interests and their ambition, but we need that ambition to translate into reality. We cannot be talking about memorandums of understanding on semiconductors anymore. We cannot be talking about differentiated regulatory views on artificial intelligence anymore. We need to actually see outcomes and projects come out of these various pacts, where the first agreement between EU and India was in 2004. So I think that the last point I'll just make is that, to answer your question, there is a strategic alignment. There are operational frictions. The frictions are on trade. The frictions are on CBAM. The frictions are you regulate too much, we don't regulate enough. We have different standards. But we have to find a way, and that's going to be the job of the politicians, is to find a way to balance the alignment and frictions to create an outcome, and very soon. Let me stop there for now.
Thank you very much for a very clear and cogent voice from India, which I think is extremely important. I will now turn to Heather, back to Europe, if I may, and the challenges we have. You recently wrote in a memo on foreign policy, the EU still finds it difficult to build and maintain consensus. Its quest for strategic autonomy from the US is not balanced by enough engagement with other regions. So we've just been talking about this. The question I would like to ask you, Heather, is, has the EU sufficiently equipped itself for this new world? What must it do to become more secure, more resilient, more capable of defending its interests in the world? And in other words, what are our strengths and what are our weaknesses?
I very much like the idea of doing a strengths and weaknesses sort of SWOT analysis, because some of the things that have served us well in the past can still serve us well in the future, but we need to be far more realistic in how we go about maintaining them. So I think in particular, we need to look at our dependencies and look at how much we can generate a much better sense of common strategic direction. Now, on the dependencies, we're currently still in quite a defensive mode. It's about trade defense instruments. It's about managing Trump, from one week to the next, as with all of the flip-flops and so on. But we need to have some longer-term thinking about how to reduce our dependencies in quite a strategic way. This doesn't mean making the European economy self-sufficient. Autarky is not going to work. We still need to have a lot of external trade and investment and capital flows and so on. But we also need to be much more aware of where that creates vulnerabilities. We've got used to the idea we can't be so dependent on the US for defense, and that's largely a matter of making the right investments in Europe. We could go into whether we are making the right investments on the defense side, and I'm sure Radmila Shekerinska had something to say about that. But also, if we think about our import dependencies on the rest of the world, there are a number of things coming up on the EU agenda which may not look like they're strategically important, but in practice they are. So one is forging different kinds of partnerships with other countries. As Ruja was saying, the EU-India FTA is more than an FTA. It's about a new kind of relationship, one that is about alignment strategically and thinking about what we have in common, the commonalities he referred to, rather than the narcissism of small differences. So having that sense of the geopolitical importance of that deal. I think also the clean trade and investment partnerships. The EU's about to sign one with South Africa. There are others in the pipeline. These are new kinds of agreement which are beyond just trade, which will be important, although they don't overcome the fundamental issue that, for example, the critical raw materials that the EU would like to get special access to in South Africa still have to go to China for processing, and China owns the technology for processing. So we've still got to think quite carefully about how that's going to work. So it's about relationships with other countries, but it's also thinking about how to de-risk our supply chains, to de-risk our value chains. We can't do that all of a sudden because that leads to retaliation, for example, from China, but we can build supplementary supply chains. That's something that we've looked at in quite a lot of detail at Bruegel and come up with some ideas on how to do that. And it's also about resource efficiency. In Europe, we are a resource-poor continent. Not only do we not have fossil fuels, we also import most of our raw materials. And that creates some big strategic vulnerabilities, particularly on China, but also on a lot of other countries. And the EU is a buyer in what's becoming a seller's market. So what can a buyer do? Strategically, the bargaining power that a buyer has is to reduce its demand. So that's where the Circular Economy Act, due next year, could actually be a critical part of reducing import dependencies which are becoming toxic. I won't go into that more now, but this area of the circular economy is actually a really key one for strategic autonomy for the EU. But we also need strategic direction. We talk a lot in this town about unity. We need to have more unity. We do need to have more unity, but strategic direction is something different. It's a sense of what kind of continent do we want to be in 2040 and how will we get there? Now, we used to talk more about plans. The French especially love to talk about le plan. In fact, they've just set up a new antenna of the Haut Commissaire du Plan here in Brussels. And we used to have deals, like the Green Deal. We don't talk about that so much anymore. And some of our deals are coming unstuck by having a rather rocky, politically very turbulent omnibus process, which is at the moment creating more regulatory uncertainty rather than simplification. So we also need to think about our strengths in terms of having strategic direction. We need to have a clearer plan for decarbonisation now, given the turbulence that there has been. We need to have a clearer plan for what the economic security doctrine will actually lead to. What's the timetable by which we wish to achieve these things? We can't just have ambitions. We also need to have a timetable and ways of implementing it. And I think there we need to build on our strengths. The fact that we do have, on the whole, a pretty clear regulatory framework. Let's keep it clearer, maintain it. We are a reliable partner that stays the course. So that's important given that China is now appearing as that partner more in the global south, providing, for example, clean tech. So how to maintain that reputation. And we have rule of law rather than oligarchs running our economy. That's also an advantage. So those are strengths that we can build on, but we need to have a much clearer sense of where we want to get to.
Thanks very much, Heather. I very much like the way you weave together the various policies, because there's not one single answer to the problems we're having, and you must see the interlink between policies. So I will now quickly ask short follow-up questions, and then we open the floor. And I'll start with Mark, for please a short answer. Mark, it's a slightly provocative thing I want to ask you. We look at the horizon 2040. Would you agree with me that if in 2040 we still rely for our defense on NATO, we failed? Because one, that means we haven't constructed our own defense, and number two, we have not found a way to reconstruct a relationship with Russia.
Look, I totally agree with you. I think that nobody thinks that Europe can stand on its own 2 feet now. We have a lot of key strategic enablers which we depend for the US on, and the nuclear deterrent is absolutely central. And I think it's quite possible Putin will still be in the White House. In the Kremlin.
Oh, that's a good one. We'll transmit that one.
In 2040. So I think we do need to think about a long-term plan to deal with an expansionist and Russia, which is directly threatening a lot of EU member states. And we also need to work out how Ukraine fits into our security future. And that is something which we're going to have to build the capacity, hopefully, to carry on working with the US and have a more balanced and more grown-up strategic partnership with the United States of America. But it's pretty clear that the US interest in Europe is just going to go down with every president that comes into the White House in the future, and that our interests are likely to be aggregated in ways that are less and less beneficial to us. When I was in China, I actually met with some Russians, and they said that their goal is to keep the US in, to keep Ukraine down, and to keep the EU out when it comes to the relationship with Ukraine. And I don't know whether they'll manage to do that, but part of what they're hoping is that they can do deals with the US over our heads, which don't take European security interests into account. And the only way we can have a seat at the table is if we have a serious policy, and that means a serious deterrent. It means that we have a political strategy for integrating our neighborhood, and we have a way of dealing with Russia ourselves on our own terms, rather than doing it through the White House. And the challenge is, how do you, on the one hand, do the tactical stuff that we talked about, but at the same time build the societal consent for having huge investments in defense spending and a way of thinking which is a bit less dependent and a bit more autonomous. And that's a very tricky balance to maintain. I'm not sure that we've got it totally right at the moment, because we're putting so much effort into the tactical side of things.
Thanks a lot, Mark. I'm turning to Rudra. India will have the chairmanship of BRICS next year. Now, BRICS was created in a way as a counterweight to the West. I would be interested to hear from you how India wants to use the chairmanship, and particularly with respect to some elements of the West, like the European Union. Can you tell us a bit about this? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So, for some BRICS countries, BRICS might be an architecture for a counterweight. I don't think that's the way it's been seen in India in serious circles. I would see it very much as India being a bridge between the South and the North, and a living bridge, right? Now, is it a fragile bridge? Yes, but it's a bridge nonetheless. So this is on the broader point of how I think we imagine the BRICS is number one is the bridge. Two, I think I think Heather talked about the Global South. You can't really be a voice for the Global South and shape agendas in the Global South if you're now not shaping the agenda in the BRICS. And I think that brings me to the presidency next year. The Indian Prime Minister has been very vocal about the fact that this presidency is going to be very different. I think he wants to take the agenda forward. He's even reconceptualized the entire acronym of the BRICS. It's going to be more about resilience, innovation. I think he wants to focus on technology. He wants to focus on innovation pathways, infrastructure. which all sounds great. And I think there's a lot of ambition over there. There are, of course, some realities that will kind of kick in at some particular point in time. Is on technology, for instance, what can you do with the BRICS? We don't really want to do anything with the Chinese, right? We're a country that has still banned TikTok. That might open up because of political considerations at some point, but we banned it. Is there a market in Russia for high-tech, access for us? Maybe in hypersonics, maybe at some level in quantum. And I think there the European Union, coming to the last part of your question, is actually quite important. Because for India, whether it's through the BRICS or otherwise, you will look for opportunities to access certain kinds of technologies like quantum and hypersonics, no matter how good or bad they are, if it's not available to you on the other side of your balance sheet, right? Quantum is a good example. Whether it was Biden or whether it's Trump, there's very little play with India on it. Can we do something with quantum with the European Union, right? That's a micro example, but that's the kind of balance that we'll have to kind of keep finding. And I think that's where India will keep looking at opportunities. But by and large, I think the presidency is going to be about reshaping the BRICS. It's going to be about actually breaking the acronym from the Global South into innovation and resilience. And my sense is we should see it as a bridge, and Europe should see it as as India being a very useful component of a geopolitical reality that's not going away.
Thank you very much. This, I must say, is a very encouraging intervention from a European perspective. I think this idea of the BRICS as a bridge rather than as a counterweight is something which I like very much. I'll turn to Heather again. Heather, Bruegel, you're working a lot on economic security, generally speaking, and I want you to talk us a bit about this, and maybe also in this context. Well, obviously, it is in the context of the search for strategic autonomy, maybe also say a quick word on how are we going to finance all of that?
Yes, the 800 billion euro question, I think it was. So Mario Draghi told us this time last year, well, actually a little bit, it was in September last year, that Europe needs to be spending 800 billion a year on innovation. And actually we do spend a lot on innovation. The problem is that it's all scattered and it's largely spent at national level by the member states, whereas the US has a federal budget, or used to, at any rate, be spending that on the federal budget on innovation. So the innovation side of it is really key because that tends to deliver the kind of growth and the kind of spillovers which then allow you to, it helps to fund then major breakthroughs. So that's clearly one area that's going to be really important. But we can also be bolder, I think, in thinking about in a world which is more turbulent and where everyone is seeking safe havens for capital and where there is real concern about the future of the dollar, for example, as a reserve currency, we could be bolder in thinking about what we do with our financial assets. The euro, for example, as a reserve currency, there's still great caution among member states, especially the central banks, about the idea of the euro becoming a reserve currency. We need to have a rather more strategic debate about the pros and cons of this. It shouldn't just be confined to the ivory towers of the central banks. I think it's a wider thing. And particularly the idea of a European safe asset, which was another Draghi proposal. These are areas of leveraging the reliability of the European Union as an economy, but also as a locus of economic policy making. So those sorts of issues, again, I think, your point, Jim, about the need to join up the policies, they are there too, especially because coercion has come recently mainly through trade instruments. But it won't necessarily stay through trade instruments. It can come through capital controls. It can come through currency manipulation. We've seen that from a number of countries before. It can also come through all kinds of things like sabotage of critical infrastructure and so on. So I think we need to have a more holistic view of security and a more holistic view of the comparative advantages of Europe and how to use them. And that's where I think this idea of long-term thinking to 2040 is really necessary. That is what has mobilized money in the EU in the past. MFFs have not mobilized money because everybody is so obsessed with the overall cap, what's the overall amount, and each national envelope. And the Commission is now trying to make that more explicit. But it's never going to go much beyond 1% of EU GDP. This is a minuscule amount of money. In absolute terms, it can make a lot of difference on innovation and so on, but it's not going to move the macroeconomy. The macroeconomics change when instead you start thinking about how to mobilize private capital as well as national budgets in favour of a project, this idea of mission-oriented funding. Now, the EU has done mission-oriented funding very successfully in the past. Launch of the single market, 1992, the launch of the euro. Also other projects which didn't have money specifically on the table, but which really facilitated the economy. For example, Schengen, borderless trade. So those kinds of big projects, I think, are still possible, but we have to be more nimble in how we do them. So I'm a little concerned about, I'm very much in favour of the idea of the EU having a long-term plan for economic security, but this doctrine word worries me a bit. You know, on the whole, theologians tell you doctrines shouldn't get changed too often, but we actually need a very nimble economic security strategy. I think strategy is perhaps better as a term, but we need to be able to nimble implementation, but we do need a clear sense of direction, and that would bring in the capital. I mean, we saw the way the European Green Deal brought in an enormous amount of private sector capital, which we now risk losing again. So we also need to stick to the knitting and be clearer in staying the course.
Thanks very much. A very important point you make. Obviously, I mean, the EU budget at 1.20, depends, percent of GNI is not going to solve all the problems. You have to see it in the broader perspective. Joint borrowing. I'm convinced we need more joint borrowing again. We need to finish the EU Capital Markets Union, obviously. But now it's time to turn to the audience. Please state your name and your affiliation, and please ask short questions, because I don't know how much time we've left, but we have very little time left. So I see a gentleman over there. Yes? Yes? No? Speak into it. No.
Oh, okay, now it's better, yes. Thank you very much for this extremely interesting conversation, and thank you very much to Heather for mentioning the opening of Le Plan in Brussels. So I'm going to have the pleasure of representing this old institution created by Jean Monnet in 1946 that now has a different purpose today, which is more foresight and intellectual. And so I'm very glad to be able to interact with all of you today. And I was very interested in a point you made, Heather, about demand as a tool for power and security and independence. And I was just wondering, we are working quite a lot on the issue of sobriety and the circular economy at Le Plan in Paris, but more at a national level, and how we can create policy tools to use demand as a strategic lever also for autonomy. And I was wondering, what kind of European collective tools we can put in place to use it strategically, especially at a time of resource scarcity, where tough choices need to be made. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I take two other questions. There was a gentleman over there, and there is, yeah, please.
Okay.
Third question.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Francisco Furtado. I'm from Portugal, the Center for Planning, Public Policy Evaluation, where I'm the head of the Foresight and Planning team. My question first more to Rudra from India. I sensed a sense of urgency in your first intervention regarding a window of opportunity for this strategic alignment with India. Am I correct in this assessment, meaning that there is now this alignment, there is now this window of opportunity, but this window of opportunity won't stay open forever, and there is other things in the world besides Brussels, if I may say so. So first question for Rudra.
Yeah, thanks. No, I think one question is enough.
Okay.
I'm sorry, because we have other people. Yes, please, over there.
Good morning. I'm Marcus Becker from GLC in Cape Town, South Africa. I've noticed with great interest the importance that was raised about partnerships looking to the east and the south. And coming from Africa, I wonder, what do we see the partnership with Africa towards 2040? It's a very young continent, and I think it being so close to Europe plays a huge nature in whatever our role is. So I want to hear some thoughts about that, please.
Yeah, thanks very much. So Heather first.
Yes, so I love the French term sobriété. In English, it generally speaking means you don't drink alcohol, which doesn't sound so terribly appealing. But another way of putting it is resource efficiency and resource productivity to match labor productivity. We are still very wasteful in our use of resources in Europe. You know, on average, in Europe per capita, we use 3 times as many materials in a year as they do in Africa. So, point there on the African partnership. The US uses 5 times as much as the average African, but that's another story. But this idea of Enrico Letta had an extremely interesting section in his report on the future of the single market last year about the circular single market as a source of resilience and competitiveness, but also as a source of economic security, because it frees us of toxic dependencies on authoritarian regimes, not only for fossil fuels, but other things. It frees us from volatile commodity prices, and it also frees us from weaponization of dependencies, which may not even be, they can also be weaponized by the climate, by the way, not only by hostile governments, but climate change is going to make resources more scarce for everybody. It will become a lot more expensive to extract and process as water becomes scarcer, as heat goes up, and so on. So Europe, as a resource-poor continent, can prepare for this faster than other more wasteful countries do, because we already have a good regulatory framework for increasing resource efficiency by using fewer resources in the first place through eco-design, as well as on reuse, remanufacturing, and so on. And at Bruegel, we're now doing some quite extensive work on how much we could save in terms of materials usages. And that would stand us in good stead as a continent in the future as times get tougher. But it's also, these are solutions that can be exported, including to Africa, which is a very resource-efficient continent, but also one with an enormous scarcity of materials for meeting human needs. And I think that is where, to come to your question about the relationship with Africa, we're moving into a completely different one from where, you know, the colonial and then the post-colonial relationships. We're going to be Africa as a source of both resources and labor is going to be extremely important, and that's where Europe needs to start thinking about. Okay, so what would a good set of relationships look like going to 2040? And I think they will look very different from the ones that we've had in the past. But at the moment, that is a mindset shift that has not really happened.
Thanks very much, Huldra. About the window of opportunity, maybe you can come back on that one.
Thanks, Jim. So my friend from Portugal, I don't think it's urgency as much as striking on the opportunity, right? And every opportunity has a certain degree of urgency built around it, even if we can't articulate it, right? And what do I mean by that is, look, India will look to sign an FTA with both the United States and the European Union in the next 3 months, right? And my sense is I would put a probability on the first at about 60%, the second at about 70%, right? Not doing one with either doesn't mean that there is a like-by-like replacement for either. Both have a specific rationale. FTA with the US is to get our relationship going again. FTA with the European Union is to open a new opportunity altogether, all the way to 2040 and beyond, right? But having said that, so that's the strategic layer. But at the prosaic layer, I'll be completely honest. You know, when you're a country like India and you're hit with 50% tariffs from your largest market in the United States, your furniture builders, your wrought iron builders, your curtain manufacturers, your textile manufacturers are worried. They'll only survive till 1st of December. Beyond that, they need new markets. And where do you find a new high-value market? That's the European Union. Yeah. And if I can just add one point, Jim, on Africa, is, you know, there's a huge opportunity in Africa on something as simple as digital and tech. Yeah. India and various quarters, we've been talking to various parts of the European Union, DG Connect and others about what more can you do? And I think as part of this FTA gets going and this agenda set between India and the EU gets cemented, we just have to kind of get to projects in Africa, right? And there's a sense that I have some tech, you have some tech, can we align it? It's more, we have tech, can we do it together and find a market rationale for it?
Thank you very much. I think that's a brilliant idea, actually. Now, we have time for three questions. Again, be short so we can have 3 and 3 answers. The gentleman over there. No ladies yet? Anyway, you go first.
Thank you. My name is Federico Favia, and I'm a researcher here in Brussels at the European Army Interoperability Center. My question is specifically about the strategic direction of the EU's enlargement agenda, which is being given priority nowadays also as a way to respond to a security threat of Russia's aggressive stance to gain influence on neighboring states. There's always a lot of discussion about the readiness level of candidate countries to access the EU, but I would like to hear your assessment of the reverse question. So given how enlargement would bring consensus challenges and more actors at the table, for a union that's already quite constrained in its ability to advance positions beyond the lowest common denominator. So is there a strategy by the EU to enlarge credibly beyond just chasing a mere spheres of influence logic? So beyond just controlling an area to avoid that it goes into the adversarial spheres of influence? Thank you.
Thank you very much. A rather complex question, which we should probably prolong for an hour and then have a debate about that, but I hope we can give short answers. Is there any other question out there now? Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Silva Havlo. I'm from DG International Partnerships of the European Commission. And I'm so pleased that we actually also hear some opportunities here now, because the previous two panels were actually heavier on the challenges. So thanks very much for this. My question is actually linked to level of public debt globally, and if you have any insights on that, how the opportunities you mentioned could actually be used to lower the levels of public debt or address them.
Thank you very much. Mark, would you like to say something about enlargement?
Sure. Look, I think we're basically stuck in this dilemma where, on the one hand, for geopolitical reasons, as you discussed, we have no option but to find a way of integrating countries which want to pursue a European path, particularly Ukraine, Moldova, and they are absolutely central to our security and to our future. And on the other hand, it's clear that there is very little public desire for enlargement, and once you start looking at the technical details of bringing kind of country, an economy the size of Ukraine into the single market, into the common agricultural policy, it's almost impossible to imagine countries like Poland, for example, being able to survive that. So the question is, how do you reconcile those questions? And that's before you get to these questions about the ability of the EU to make decisions and to find a common direction on these very, very difficult things. And that's what was leading to lots of discussions about gradual integration, about whether countries could be able to join without actually having a seat at the council, without having access to the institutions. It's very hard to imagine any kind of changes to the treaties and things like that. So things are likely to kind of be stuck for a long time. But I suspect that we're not going to see enlargement to the Western Balkans or to Ukraine and Moldova in the way that the last waves of enlargement took place. Some people think, Montenegro might sneak in. I frankly think that's unlikely and not a particularly great idea anyway, because I think we need to have a more radical rethink about what the EU is and what it means to have a European security community in the future. So I think we should lean into that and be creative and get all of the kind of energy and inspiration which people in Brussels can show when they're facing new challenges onto thinking about new models rather than trying to force very different circumstances into a pattern which worked well in the past, but I think has reached the end of its kind of useful life.
Thanks, Mike. Quick, do you agree?
I don't think the budget is going to be a big problem. In fact, we've done significant number crunching on this, particularly my colleague Zsolt Darvas at Bruegel, and integrating Ukraine into the EU budget is actually not such a big deal. Not only because the budget will itself change over the period when Ukraine will be negotiating, but also because you can always have long transitional periods. Poland had 10 years of transition before Polish farmers were getting what French farmers get. And in the meantime, of course, there'll be reconstruction in Ukraine, which will bring in a lot of money. So Ukraine will be less poor.
Which we will pay anyway.
Yeah, which we will pay through other means than the budget. So I don't think that's so much the issue. But what is really key is actually the geopolitics. It's not so much spheres of influence as you put it. It's more the question of what happens to countries which find themselves between the European Union and Russia? It's not that we, as the European Union has never been that keen to extend its sphere of influence. Enlargement has always been a gradual process, highly contested. It only tends to happen when geopolitical urgency overcomes domestic resistance. And I think that will happen again with Ukraine. What's much more tricky is how to deal with the fact that Russia wishes to increase its sphere of influence. We see what's happened in Georgia, we see all the election interference and so on. So it's the destabilization, both political and economic, of the other countries and what to do about that, which is, I think, the real dilemma. Integrating countries into the EU is tricky. What's even harder is how to avoid them being integrated into a Russian oligarchy of instability.
Thanks very much. I think I want to leave the final word to our guest from New Delhi, Rudra, simply in one or two lines on the basis of what you'd heard from the European side here. Are you optimistic about Europe or not?
I'm always optimistic about Europe, Jim. But look, I think there's a cliched answer and there's a kind of a real answer. The cliched answer is that I think if Europe wants to redefine itself, take countries like India with it into 2040 and beyond, it's going to also have to shed some of its own normative patterns, right? Let me just put it that way. Because there is no alignment, and that's serious, right? You can have all the semiconductors in the universe, but if your normative framework is not elastic enough, you're not going to be able to reap the benefits of the capabilities that you're investing in for 2040 and beyond. So shake out and bring in would be the banner sticker that I would use.
Rudra, that is great, because it allows me to use one of my slogans, which I always use to Europeans. Please stop preaching to the whole world, because it's completely counterproductive. That doesn't mean that we should forsake our values, but the way we try and preach to Africa or to other countries is completely misplaced, and it's actually weakens us. I conclude this now. I think my overall comment here is very short. It's not all doom and gloom, thank you very much, but a lot remains to be done. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.
So much. So, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks. Right. And you can leave the... Oh, you get a little... Yes, yes. Thank you so much to our panelists. That was a really insightful and thoughtful and slightly optimistic panel. So thanks again to Jim for great moderation. We did promise you at one point a Slido. Now is the time, just as we kind of transit to our next session, which will be on the future of intergenerational fairness. You see the QR code and you see the hashtag for ESPAS 25. And when you get to it, the question will be, what will be the key challenges future generations will face up to 2040? So your chance for those of you in the room, and of course for those of you online, to share your thoughts with us. The results of that will be evident later on in the panel. So you will not see, you can post whatever you want now, but you will not see the results straight away. However, I would now like to invite our next panel to take the floor. We have a couple of guests joining us online. And we have a couple in the room. So, this next panel, Intergenerational Fairness, How to Deliver a Fairer Future for All. So find your... Yeah,
Dear State Secretary, we don't have the video.
Do you hear? Great, nice to meet you. Okay, so we will have two joining us online.
Yes, we are going online. Can you please turn on the video, please?
Yes.
Perfect.
It would be amazing if we didn't have a tiny technical glitch. It's okay.
Cuando abres tu normalmente te enfoca más cerca. Esto lo ves. El tamaño yo lo puedo acercar más.
Y el micrófono está, sí, acerca un poco más, y el micrófono está on.
I think we move closer. I think Pia is going to come, but a little bit later. And if not, if we find out not, we will move you closer.
Good morning from Madrid. Can you hear us?
Perfectly, perfectly. So
Yes.
let me just introduce our speakers and our moderator, and then we'll get the panel underway. So joining us from Spain, we have Fernando Mariano Sampredo Marcos, Spain's State Secretary for the European Union. Good morning to you. Joining us from Brasilia, we have Virginia de Angelis Oliveira de Paula, and Virginia is the National Secretary of Planning in the Ministry of Planning and Budget of Brazil. You're very welcome. We have Peter Van Isse here, from the full Professor of Political Economy and Public Policy in the Department of Political Science and Public Management at the University of South Denmark. That is not even your full title, but this session has one of the longest series of titles. And a little bit later, we will have Pia Arenkeld Hansen, who, of course, is our Director General for DG EAC, European Education, Sports and Culture. And here in the room with us, we have Jacob Ellis. And Jacob is Director for External Relations and Culture, Office of the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales. And you'll have the nice role of moderating. So over to you, Jacob. Thank you.
Well, Prynhawn da, good afternoon. That's a bit of Welsh for you. So if I inspire you to learn a bit of Welsh and to join the target of 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050, then join us in that endeavour. I'm very excited to see the results of the Slido. We'll come to that very shortly. But you will notice that there is an empty seat. There are 2 empty seats on stage. I just want to explain why. So Pia will join us hopefully very shortly. But rather symbolically, I'm going to place that chair at the end to remind us of those not yet born. Many committees, parliamentary committees, cabinet rooms across the world have now decided to do this as a bit of an indication, a prompt to decision makers, to policy makers. So if nothing else, it is a symbolic reminder of those not yet born. And I'll see you have many other empty chairs around you. Maybe that's also an indication of future generations. Today is also World Kindness Day, so as moderator, I'm going to be as kind as I can in both the questions that I will ask, but in the time that I allow you to answer them. But as a former rugby referee, I do not want to bring out my red cards or yellow cards, so please do not test me too much in terms of your timings. You're smiling now, but I hope you honour the time that I've gifted you in the outset. There'll be plenty of other opportunities to make interventions and to comment on each other's comments. So I ask very kindly that we keep our interventions brief to accommodate as much of the time as we can. Well, the concept of intergenerational fairness has become more prominent, hasn't it, in the public discourse in recent years, mainly as a consequence of our society's ageing, climate change, and in general, that environmental footprint of human activity. And as you've heard this morning, Commissioner Mikalev indicating the work, the brilliant work that's underway to develop an intergenerational fairness strategy. But the EU is not unique in that quest. You just heard, I'm from Wales. The Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in Wales marks its 10th anniversary this year, with an independent commissioner supporting the implementation of that legislation. But countries all across the world, Australia, Canada, India, Spain, Brazil, all have their intergenerational fairness approaches. It's becoming the cool new kid on the block, this exciting piece of work. And the increasing relevance and importance of intergenerational fairness has been recognised globally by the adoption, of course, of the Declaration on Future Generations, which was adopted at the UN Summit of the Future. We'll just welcome Pia to the stage. Good morning. Good afternoon. What are we? different time zones. Hello. You're straight into things. That's what we like to hear. Well, welcome, Pierre. We'll come to you shortly. That declaration on future generations passed at the UN summit last year, placing that it is important for us to safeguard the needs and interests of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And if we don't manage to give you all information in the time that we've got, and gentle encouragement for you to familiarize yourselves with the Declaration on Future Generations, but also this fantastic recently published Intergenerational Fairness paper by the ESPAS team. Brilliant. I met some of the colleagues last night, and a lot of work goes into preparing these documents, and I do commend the team for their hard work. I think we're ready to jump into things formally, and possibly starting. I've provided a little bit of the context, the backdrop to all of this, but I'm very keen to start with you, Mr. San Pedro Marcos. A gentle reminder once again, and I won't keep repeating it, but let's keep our comments brief if we can at the outset. I do not want to intervene. But Spain has put in place intergenerational fairness-related policies, including the intergenerational equity mechanism initiated in 2023, which is an increase in the social security contribution part by employers and employees to the Social Security Reserve Fund to preserve the balance between generations and strengthen the stability of the social security system in the long term. It should prevent the younger generations from assuming the full weight of the retirement of more populated generational groups. And I was pleased yesterday to join the Foresight practitioners and your colleague, Marina Diaz, possibly she's in the room today, but from the National Office of Foresight and Strategy, spoke proudly of the work being done in Spain. So I would like to hear from you, Mr. San Pedro Marcos, about approaches to intergenerational fairness taken in Spain, and do tell us which key related measures the Spanish government is putting in place. Croeso, welcome.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. Intergenerational fairness is, of course, an essential pillar of our social agenda. Developing a genuine European social agenda, strengthening and completing the European pillar of social rights is a top priority for Spain, as you have said. As we already saw during the Spanish presidency of the Council in 2023, we consider it a moral imperative, a duty, and a strategic investment in Europe's future, which will provide the conditions for a smooth triple transition, covering both ecological and digital, but also social aspects. The implications are indeed very broad. IGF is enshrined in our Constitution, which refers to the promotion of the free and effective participation of youths in the political, social, and economic and cultural development of the country, and commits public authorities to guarantee the well-being and dignity of the elderly through adequate pensions and social services. Our understanding of intergenerational fairness therefore links both ends of life, youth and old age, under the same principles of solidarity, participation, and shared responsibility. As such, our perspective on IGF covers a broad range of different policies, from fostering stable employment to ensuring the sustainability of our pensions and social protection systems, including affordable housing, which is, I know, a key priority for this Commission, and mechanisms to tackle poverty and ensure a steady access to quality healthcare and education. This commitment has led us already in 2022 to the development of the 2030 Youth Strategy, which is deeply rooted in the international commitments to which Spain is party, including the 2030 strategy, the European Youth Strategy you have referred to, and the principles of the European Pillar of Social Rights. This strategy led through participatory processes by the Spanish Youth Council and established already the foundations for a new social contract with the young. This new social contract stems from a shared analysis of the current socioeconomic conditions of the young and incorporates their perspective and demands for the future in 5 core areas of public policy contemplated in the law on youth and intergenerational fairness that we are currently drafting and is in public consultation. These are material rights and social coverage, democratic rights and political participation, mental health and well-being, the eco-social crisis and the rights of future generations, And last but not least, co-governance and understanding the realities of the young. When it comes to the elderly, Spain has also worked closely with European institutions to promote their rights. In line with the 2021 Green Paper on Aging of the European Commission, the European Intergenerational Pact drafted during our presidency summarized the main conclusions of the consultations that we initiated 2 years prior at the Logroño Summit, highlighting the urgent need to protect vulnerable populations, those at the extremes, at the margins, or directly excluded from the social system. Finally, you mentioned the International Equity Mechanism established in 2023, which involves an increase in the contributions paid by the workers and companies, the revenue from which is allocated to the Social Security Reserve Fund to help cover future pension payments. And concluding, the objective of this mechanism is to distribute the financial burden of pensions between generations and ensure that future generations don't bear the brunt of pension payments allocated to our baby boom generation. This measure will remain in place until 2032, with some effects extending to 2050, and is a good example of how to ensure pension sustainability while safeguarding younger generations' financial future. Thank you.
Perfect. And we've started well on our timing, so I am grateful for the remarks and for keeping as best as you could to timing there. And raising some interesting reflections straight away in terms of the definition of intergenerational fairness. That is something I think that is continuously being debated, being discussed, and that's quite refreshing in one sense. One could argue that this concept is very new. And some could argue that it's deeply embedded into our indigenous wisdom for centuries. And how do we start playing and working with different terminology, different narrative? How do we do that fast and move from definitions to implementation? I think that's possibly also equally important. But I was grateful as well for some of the more specific examples in Spain and how this has been embedded across a multitude of policy fronts. We'll return to some of those later. Virginia, I'm not sure what time it is, but good morning and possibly very early for you. So thank you for joining us online at a busy time for Brazil, and fingers crossed for a successful COP outcome in the coming days. But Brazil is one of the frontrunners in seeking to advance intergenerational equity. Your Constitution of 1988 explicitly enshrines the principle of intergenerational equity in Article 225, stipulating that everyone has the right to an ecologically balanced environment, a common good essential to healthy quality of life, and both public authorities and the community have a duty to defend and preserve it for present and future generations. So we understand that since 1988, the intergenerational fairness approach evolved, encompassing other areas as intergenerational social mobility. Can you explain to us the present approach to intergenerational fairness in Brazil, and what are the key related policies? Virginia, over to you.
Thank you, Jacob. Good morning for everyone. It's 8:11 here in Brazil. And let me begin by saying how meaningful it is to discuss this topic, intergenerational fairness, today, just after returning from COP30 in Belén. I was there yesterday and the day before yesterday, where the world is gathered in the Amazon to negotiate decisions that will shape the lives of future generations. It's auspicious to be here today. Yes, indeed, Brazil's commitment to intergenerational equity is long-standing. As you said, since 1988, our constitution establishes this principle not only in the Article 225, but through the whole document, through the environmental lens, and also regarding social mobility, territorial equity, reduction of inequalities, and long-term fiscal responsibility, which was enforced in our fiscal responsibility law from 2000. And looking ahead, this principle necessarily includes climate resilience, digital inclusion, and demographic preparedness. This broader understanding has guided the reconstruction of our planning state since 2023. We had passed through a period of which planning function, the state planning function was dismantled in Brazil, and planning is a central element itself. Intergenerational fairness demands a change of mindset. The state must take decisions that address urgent needs, repair historic inequalities, and prepare for the future challenges, all at the same time. And planning function becomes a strategic tool to align immediate action with long-term well-being. So our approach is structured around 4 main pillars in this planning reconstruction. First, evidence-based policy and foresight. Second, delivery of results to society. Third, deep social participation. And finally, whole of government and multi-level coordination, since we are a federation and we must act in articulation with states and more than 500 municipalities. Regarding evidence-based policy and foresight, I must highlight that we rebuilt our main medium-term national planning, starting with the pluriannual plan, which is a constitutional tool, a budgetary law that gives a strategic orientation for budget and for public administration. The plan was designed with scenario analysis and megatrends, just like climate risk, demographic transition, digital transformation, and includes territorial inequalities, which is a huge problem here in Brazil that we must solve. From this analysis, government deliveries were organized into societal results, climate sustainability and economic development, and state capabilities and defense of democracy and sovereignty. Each result has its KPI, is monitored by KPIs, and this work of monitoring takes place twice a year through our public dashboard, which strengthen accountability across generations. Second, relating to delivering results to society, we must address real population needs. So PPA connects budget priorities to concrete outcomes in health, education, care policies, climate resilience, and regional development. This is essential for intergenerational fairness, since we cannot build a fair future without confronting the structural deficits of the present. Regarding social participation, this was a fundamental pillar of our planning and reconstruction. More than 1 million contributions were received from society as a whole, including adolescents and young people in the dedicated process. We made 27 state-level plenaries, which brought territorial perspectives, and participation is now continuous. Society monitors and supports annual revisions of this plan, and we must consider that when people co-author the future becomes more legitimate and more durable. Fourth, whole of government and multi-level coordination.
Very briefly, if you can, Virginia, thank you.
Oh, I cannot.
No, I'm
okay.
Try your best.
And I just would like to mention that all these pillars are pillars for our to build our long-term strategy, Brazil 2050 strategy, and that is about to be launched. And I can talk about this later. Thank you.
Thank you, and forgive me for playing chair's prerogative. Covering a variety of things there. We moved from definition in Spain there to kind of that cultural mindset, the ability to kind of be aware and to accept the culture change, this whole of government approach, and I appreciate we didn't get to it just there at the end, but understanding that everybody has a role to play. Yesterday, we touched on the importance of participatory involvement as well, and getting citizens involved in this conversation, which is where I would like to take the conversation next, or at least there's a bridge that's emerging from the conversation there. So we will turn to you, Pieter. You have carried out research on intergenerational fairness for several years. You've been involved in the European Citizens Panel, which takes place or continues this weekend, organised by the Commission, and contributing to the the preparation, try say that 5 times, the preparation of the strategy. And you've also developed a synthetic index allowing for comparing performances across the OECD countries. Let's hear from you in terms of how the concept of intergenerational fairness has evolved, and what were the key reasons behind the changes, and how does it relate to that wider social contract? A few elements there to unpack, but welcome. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks very much, and glad to be here. So let me take the last question first. So how does it relate to the social contract? Well, you know, in a very real sense, conceptually, as, for example, the greatest book of political philosophy in the 20th century by John Rawls set out, The Theory of Justice, 1971, page 3, defines society as nothing but the structure of intergenerational cooperation over time. That was his definition of society as it moves through time. And in a very real sense, this is also how we set up our societies. Yeah? So think about our welfare states. People sometimes, even in my tribe, public policy analysis are a bit confused about what welfare states really de facto do. Yeah? There's these 2 big contenders. Welfare states on the one hand are seen to be Robin Hoods, yeah? Using the tax and transfer arms, tools, to take from the rich in one or the other way and to give to the poor. And of course they do that. And then the second contender is essentially intergenerational. It's about the life cycle redistribution, the piggy bank function, if you like. Yeah? And you know, most of the time in my tribe too, we think about the Robin Hood function. But when you then look, as I did in my research, at actually how do de facto empirically our welfare states operate, they operate through this piggy bank functions much more than through the Robin Hood function. It's not even close. And you can see why in that context, yeah. Population aging, which is basically large cohorts of baby boomers, horizontally large cohorts, now retiring, living longer lives, vertically too, yeah, which is a sign of progress after all, combined with our other problem in Europe today, certainly of low or stubbornly low fertility, strains that system of cooperation, yeah, and leads to, of course, all sorts of alarmism, yeah, about worries about gerontocracy and the dictatorship of the elderly, because after all, also we know as an empirical fact, it needn't be so, but it is so, that elderly citizens de facto not just are getting more numerous by definition through aging, but also, not obvious, but factually true, go voting more often than do middle-aged or younger age groups. So that leads to all sorts of concerns that we see reflected, for example, in debates today in France about, you know, pension reform and so on. I needn't remind you of that. And so in that context, my index was a request from the Bertelsmann Foundation in Germany to reduce a little bit the drama and the alarmism, and especially also to infuse a bit of variance. Yeah? Because after all, Sweden is not Greece. Italy, on very many dimensions, is not France, and so on. So that's what I try to do with that indicator. And then I look, for example, at, okay, we heard public debt being mentioned before, so I looked, okay, outstanding government debt, all right, but what if we look at it not as per usual per capita of the population, but newly now per capita of the young population, debt per child. And then you see new things that you weren't aware of before. For example, you know, lots of variance within our Europe. And in the 29 country sample I look at, then one country out of these 29 is literally off the scale. Off the scale for Japan is different than from all the other 28 combined. Yeah? That's one thing you learn. Then to talk about the piggy bank function, what I did for that report is okay, let's now just look at, okay, the entire setup of the welfare states. This beautiful, complex cathedral of all sorts of programs, serving the old, the middle-aged, the young, and so on. And let's make a general sort of age orientation variable. Take all the elderly programs as a ratio of all the non-elderly programs, and then adjust and control that for demographic composition, so that the resulting variable is really about, what shall we say, policy preferences, policy biases, you could say, intergenerational asymmetries. So when I then did that variable for, again, the same number of countries, we find again, we are talking about a rich world, right? A rich democracy, so the tail of the global distribution, and yet in that little tail, enormous variance. Yeah? Even after controlling for how old or young a society is demographically, we see places like Greece, like Italy, like Spain, like also Poland, and surprisingly, forgive the quip, in pole position. Yeah? Even after you control for demography, they spend already today so much more than places, for example, like the Baltic states, like the Nordic states, yeah? Which have a seemingly, for different reasons we can discuss, much more age group balance. And that, of course, matters for the long term. It also matters for how younger generations today seem to be sensing ever more that something is getting wrong in the deal they're being offered, right? Something went wrong. Around 2008, the crisis, 2012, we'll talk about why that is, in terms of how the young seem to be involved or feel to be part of the rolling contract of cooperation between generations. And that may be to do with the declining degree to which, okay, they really see, that they have an equal deal. What is fairness after all? One conception of fairness is, goes back all the way to John Locke or to the Brundtland Commission in the 80s, right? Each generation, arguably, conceivably, should leave to the next enough and as much. Yeah? And then we can discuss what is really in that metric. Happy to talk about that. But there is a growing sense that we are starting to fail our younger generations, including within their hearts. And that's a worry.
And we'll move from that potential failure to potential hope, or that necessary hope. Pia, welcome. We have heard in a variety of the discussions this morning and yesterday the exciting developments for the intergenerational fairness strategy being developed, due to be published early next year. But can you tell us about the approach then taken in the preparation of that strategy and the key challenges you see in applying that approach? Thank you, Pia.
Yes, thank you very much. And yeah, let's go to practicalities. And sorry for jumping on the stage there just as you were starting. I am actually also running an education and skills summit elsewhere in town. And there I was just jumping off another panel that was discussing citizenship education. And I think we can arguably, but again, I'm jumping the gun a little bit, in some months, perhaps, look at proposing an action on intergenerational fairness as part of citizenship education, right? That would be interesting as a basic skill, right? Because we need a broader definition of basic skills to build our democracies, but also, indeed, to have more intergenerational fairness. But okay, that's a bridge. Now let me go back to your question. What is the approach? Well, the approach is that, in as far as the Commission is concerned, our President gave a mandate to a commissioner, the first commissioner ever for intergenerational fairness, Commissioner Mikalev, so President von der Leyen told him to create a strategy for intergenerational fairness. It is my privilege, and luckily not alone, and I see Bernard is sitting in front of me from the JRC, but under the Commissioner's leadership, we have been tasked to lead this work, which is in this way new, but of course, again, has been embedded from different perspectives, and of course is embedded in our treaty. For a while already. And the strategy that we then need to design is based on the idea that we've heard already, that the decisions that are taken today must strengthen the opportunities that we give to future generations tomorrow. So it's based on trust between generations. Europe must act in a way that ensures in a way that ensures that prosperity and opportunity and fairness is created between generations today, while looking beyond the immediate to safeguard the well-being of future generations. You could paraphrase it if you wanted to. So an innovative, I think, policy-making process is needed here, and we have taken an evidence-based, but also a very innovative, participatory, and inclusive approach. We don't have, and you know, I don't think Bernard has either, we don't have a directorate for intergenerational fairness or a DG for this, and I don't think Pascal sitting there is intending to create one. But we certainly, and that would also defeat the purpose a little bit, because this is a cross-cutting endeavor, you know, that it's a whole of commission approach, you know, and we are a little bit the stewards in the process, but not more than that. So therefore we have started, and I see great colleagues from this long and very productive co-creation process that was then kicked off when the president gave Commissioner Mikhailov this mandate. Silo breaking, led by the JRC in its first phases, indeed, so that we could scope what we're talking about, or what we're talking about in this context for the purposes of this strategy. So with policymakers from across the Commission, as well as external stakeholders, NGOs, experts from academia, and that gave us what we need, namely solid analytical foundations, you know, because it's no small feat actually to scope this very complex area. Then we also, and it's actually going on in its final phase this weekend, we launched a citizens panel. And that's particularly close to my heart, I have to say, because I had the privilege also to contribute to launching these when the Commission decided to bring it into its policy toolbox. So here we have 150 randomly selected citizens, as you know, of all ages, by the way, with 1/3 of the participants are young people. I think that's important, because the young people are the best proxy that we have for future generations, probably. So they deliberate and formulate a set of recommendations. We're looking forward to receive them, and you know, they will transmit them to the Commissioner on Sunday this weekend. So, so please also tune in and watch the live stream if you can, because I think it will be interesting. And so, I mean, these citizens are obviously, in a sense, the real experts, right? They are living these considerations. They are living everything that Peter was talking about in real life. So the main challenge, I think, and I pointed to it already, is ensuring that all these diverse perspectives that you can potentially bring to this enormously complex topic is put into one coherent vision. And that's, again, also something that JRC is helping us to do. But it also gives us the opportunity, you know, to put a very fresh thinking into the way we do policy making, have innovative ideas, but we need to transform these ideas into a strategy that means something, that can give direction to all the main policies in play when we talk about intergenerational fairness. And then we probably need some implementable actions. So we will have to work with all Commission services to do that. And this is what we're doing, also very much together with the Secretariat General of the Commission. So it's a whole of Commission approach. You know, the objective is ultimately, I think, to mainstream the intergenerational perspective across policy and lawmaking.
Perfect, and best of luck as you near the finish line on this work. And my thanks to the JRC, who've been leading much of the work in its early phase. There are colleagues spread across the room. I'm making eye contact with a few of them, but my thanks to you and the team for developing it and demonstrating that bold leadership. We talked yesterday about the importance of leaders taking the initiative, and we see that in abundance here at the Commission. We're going to turn to Slido. You had an opportunity at the start to reflect on the main challenges facing future generations by 2040. I have it to my right. I'm looking over my wrong shoulder. No surprise, possibly, that climate change is featuring very strongly there. We've obviously been playing with sentences as well as words. That's absolutely fine. Housing coming through strongly. War, security. I wonder how many of those you resonate with in the audience. and many will feature as part of the mega trends featured in the paper that I said that I referred to earlier on intergenerational fairness. Many of the topics, not a surprise, I'm sure, to those working in this field. We'll turn to a series of more questions for our panelists before opening the floor. So start thinking about your questions that you'd like to pose. I'll come back to Spain. I'm rather jealous of the elaborate office that we have. So let's bring that back to the screen. I'd like to ask you, Mr. San Pedro Marcos, to tell us what lessons you draw for the future from the implementation of intergenerational fairness-related policies in Spain, and what future challenges do you see, and how can these be addressed? Share your learning if you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob, and thank you for all the very inspiring interventions from Pia, Virginia, and Pieter before. I go directly to your questions to save time. Spain's experience so far offers two key lessons. The first one is that intergenerational fairness must be systemic, not sectorial. It requires coherence between social protection, education, employment, housing, and environmental sustainability. Our main challenge is the absence of a comprehensive national law that recognizes and systematizes rights from an intergenerational perspective. It is not enough to introduce targeted measures. It must be part of a comprehensive policy framework, and this is what we seek to address, among other things, through our draft law on youth that, as I said before, we are currently preparing. This law will aim to be cross-cutting and encompass the recognition of a wide range of new rights for young people. It also considers intergenerational solidarity and environmental rights for the benefit of the sustainability of the socioeconomic and ecological system. Second lesson is that participation, as many of my predecessors have underlined also, is essential. The 2030 Youth Strategy showed that progress is only possible when young people are genuine partners in decision-making. The participation brought visibility to neglected issues such as mental health, equal access to employment, and affordable housing. Likewise, taking into account the problems faced by the elderly, including the digital skills gap and the need for adequate infrastructures in cities, but more specifically in rural areas, are also essential. Then, three challenges. The first one is to guarantee that intergenerational policies reach all of Spain's regions, avoiding policy fragmentation. Second one is the need to adapt to demographic and technological shifts that will reshape our welfare systems and social contract. And third one, to confront the eco-social crisis, ensuring that our environmental footprint does not become a new form of intergenerational debt. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to stay, I think, on the theme of this, the importance of people, if I can, Virginia. How can public support be mobilised to sustain a long-term approach, despite tensions with short-term challenges and related pressures on public spending? That balance is quite difficult at times, is it not, to try and support this momentum towards the future whilst still grappling with challenges in the present? How does one go about doing that?
Thank you, Jacob. Well, in Brazil, we have just passed through recent experiences that show us that even in this context of polarized debates and positions, we can reach some huge consensus. And reaching an integrated and coherent vision is a challenge, but it is not impossible. And social participation is key for that. In our recent experience, we have seen that we can use digital tools and these kind of plenaries and public debates to engage to engage the whole society in these discussions. As I mentioned, our experience in the formulation of the medium-term plan was a huge success. And we had more than 1.4 million people participating through the digital platform, and people could choose and prioritize the main programs and issues that they wanted to see in the plan. And the first one was directly related to our main challenge today, which is climate change. And we can see that society needs are close to these mega trends and to what science is showing us that is important to consider. And we can in this social participation, we must ensure inclusiveness and diversity. So in the process of formulating the long-term strategy, we engaged youth, and they were in all the plenaries that we made. In this case, we made 16 plenaries, and they made a letter for the president and decision makers, standing there and relating their demands and their perspective for the future. And we must be able to encourage and to raise hope. We see that young people and old people are almost hopeless with the future that we have, especially regarding climate challenges. And but we can see that when we foster and promote public debate, we can anchor political decisions and legitimate the instruments that we need. And we must move forward with institutionalization of these plans, of these commitments. We must move forward with more coordination among public and non-public entities and governments, private sector. We must engage academy and scientific decisions and evidence in our decision-making process. And finally, we must connect a long-term perspective with deliveries. We must be able to respond to urgent needs, to repair historical inequalities, and also to anticipate future challenges and opportunities, because we have lots of that, and engage people in this whole process. That's what I have to say for now.
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you so much. Pieter, in our efforts to improve intergenerational fairness, we shouldn't forget, shouldn't we, about the challenge of rising inequalities. How can the intergenerational fairness approach underpin social cohesion? Interested in your perspective.
Well, in a certain sense, it is nothing but social cohesion. So, you know, this system of cooperation that I spoke about is essentially about how different generations work together, which in turn is about human capital adjusted generational succession. So it's about, you feel like the number of babies being born and then 25 years later on average being transformed into new adults, the quantity element, if you like, which in a continent ever less happy about large-scale immigration needs to be produced domestically, with some cream skimming here and there, obviously. And secondly, the quality element, what we put inside those brains, the human capital discussion, which of course becomes ever more relevant in the context of AI and so on today. So that is one key aspect to try and think harder about, because, you know, after all, what we know from the recent past and the last sort of 2 or 3 decades, which was the story of automation and the robot economy, was essentially the bounty and the spread. Yeah? The entry ticket got more expensive to labor market success, if you like. But if you pay the entry ticket, that was more expensive. You really, by augmenting your skills, had a higher reward. And that was an ever more unequal story. Yeah? That's what we know already from the recent past. The new story, the last 2 or 3 years of AI, you know, Rogoff burnt his fingers by saying this time is different, but this time may be different. Yeah. I really wonder that this time may be different. First of all, the future is inherently predictable, obviously, but I would point out that, you know, in this new round of techno-optimism we hear about, you know, the great bounty, once again, that may come from AI, I would point that we need to have some agency. Right? So in the last story, automation, we were late, but I would, you know, give flowers to the last commission. People like Breton and Vestager really did assert some agency for Europe in that debate. Yeah? I would point out we need it even more today because, you know, after all, the new promises are being promised by what is, after all, a handful of tech billionaires, mainly in China and the West Coast, not in Europe, with, to put it mildly, no proven track record of concern for human well-being, for inequalities that are rising, or for that matter of environmental processes that their ever bigger servers are using up. So agency is important, and I think we need to be quicker this time around to act and to define, and this is what the current Commission processes are actually doing right now, I think, to define our stance. Because the agency also refers to individuals. What sort of individuals do we want to create beyond concepts like leaning in and the wind is blowing this way, so it's not going to go away? What do we really want from our future citizens? The human capital content, black box, in terms of critical abilities, democratic skills. I was very pleased to hear what you said about that, Pia. And that's a debate we need urgently, because the bounty for very few and the spread for most will, this time around, I fear, be even higher.
Food for thought, and I'm conscious that I stand between you and your lunch. So I will turn to Pia, turn to some questions in the audience, and your lunch awaits. But Pia, I'm interested in the role of policies within the Directorate more broadly, and it's an exciting one: education, youth, culture, and sport. The role within the Directorate of promoting intergenerational fairness across the European Union. That's a big task, but what are your plans?
Well, our plans are to indeed contribute to this endeavor, also from those policy perspectives. Indeed, I mentioned citizenship, education, and not by chance. And I also mentioned it in relation to the democracy shield that we put on the table yesterday as the Commission. So all of this is linked. So closer to home, closer to my policy remit, we are talking about soft, but we're also talking about citizens facing and policies that are supported by programs like Erasmus that already have, I would argue, a lot of at least medium-term and actually long-term thinking and even lateral thinking built into it, because I think that's very much needed in this policy-making process. So they are well placed, I think, to contribute to this strategy alongside many other of our policies. I mean, we hear that it's not unsurprisingly climate change that tops the list, and I think that's also very much, or climate resilience, that tops the list for many when they discuss intergenerational fairness, and things like digital inclusion was mentioned, and of course, in addition to the pensions and debts and so forth. So this is also a lot, I think, what we will hear from our citizens this weekend, because the citizens panel on intergenerational fairness, as I mentioned, is ongoing. So that's another, let's say, contribution that we can make. But generally speaking, education, youth, sport, and culture policies, they do have as an aim to build cohesive, inclusive, and resilient societies. So it goes well in hand with what the aim of the intergenerational fairness strategy is. I mentioned the skills side already, that is broader, of course, than citizenship skills, because it's lifelong learning. And it's equipping citizens with skills for the future in strategic sectors that not only for the next 5 years, but actually for decades will enable Europe, to step up in terms of its own strategic autonomy, because strategic autonomy is also needed to basically build the intergenerational vision that we think is right for our citizens in Europe. Youth policy we already mentioned, and we are doing a lot to promote participation, again, because they are the best representatives that we have of the next generation, and Commissioner Mikhailov definitely is very keen that the strategy has a strong youth dimension, youth checks, link into the better regulation tools that we have in the Commission that also very much have this intergenerational perspective built in when we talk about impact assessment, not only for the next few years, but actually for quite a long time. So, so I would say that alongside, things like the Democracy Shield that I mentioned, and the also specific initiatives and projects that we promote, like, by the way, an across generations prize that we have in our sport prizes, we are well placed, I think, with those citizen-facing policies that have the long-term perspective to contribute, but we need everybody on board in the policy making in the Commission.
Thank you, Pia. And it is important, isn't it, that you walk the talk of not just telling others how to do intergenerational fairness, but how do you apply that in your own directorate? And you've given us some ideas there. It's time to open the floor for some reflections, some questions. You will have all noticed that my yellow cards and red cards have stayed in my pocket. I didn't need them for the panelists. I hope I won't need them for the audience. So I will ask you politely, constructively, to keep your questions short, so that we can go to as many as we can. We'll take a few from the floor, and then we'll come to the panel. Forgive me, I like to go to a woman first, so I'll go here, and I'll come back to you on the right. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Anna Kielholzer. I'm head of unit for strategic foresight and long-term resilience in the Austrian Federal Chancellery. And I had the pleasure to participate in the process of developing the intergenerational fairness strategy upon the invitation of Commissioner Mikalev to the foresight Sherpas in the EU member states. One of the outcomes of our discussion was that strategic foresight represents a key tool to strengthen the intergenerational fairness in the future. So I was wondering, how do you plan to reflect this outcome in the first draft of the strategy? Thank you.
Great question, and thank you for keeping it brief. Here on the right, thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting us, and thank you for the insightful presentations. I just wanted to encourage, I come from Malta. Very proud to have a commissioner who's leading this role. I also tend to want to encourage the rest of the audience and the panel that in Malta, generations and future generations are an integral part of the conversation of social dialogue in the way we develop policy. Over the last couple of years, we realized that our country as well needs a vision, and we are currently concluding what is called an Envision 2050 with KPIs that takes us up to 2035. That incorporates both sides of the House and Parliament, all social partners, and of course future generations. Future generations, children between the ages of 11 and 14, had the opportunity to explain what they expect their country to look like in the future on account of each and every one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And they have developed this in various...
Your question, just if I can...
No, it's a comment. It's a comment of encouragement, that's all. A comment of encouragement to show that whatever is being planned is actually in action at the moment, and it's quite encouraging that maybe we are able to move forward in a manner which uses resources, the current limited resources of our country, the most efficient way. Thank you.
Thank you. Hans. Yes, gentleman just behind. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Diogo Lemos. I'm a strategic foresight trainee for DG INTPA at the Commission. So thank you so much for bringing this topic and for the panel. I also welcome very much the idea of the chair for the unborn people, but it comes also to me the question, where is the chair for the people that are already born, but they are still young? So yesterday or 2 days ago, I was in a meeting with young leaders from around the world, and it was actually a word that really struck with me, which was tokenization. And unfortunately, I see that is perhaps very often the tendency of everything that is related to intergenerational fairness and also, to be honest, strategic foresight. So yeah, I'd like to have your views around that. How can we actually move from beautiful words and framings that actually fit and are very useful for the people that are already in power to something that is truly impactful, transformational, and tangible in terms of results? Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to continue going to the floor before returning, and I will attempt to briefly summarize. I've got a few hands. I'm just looking for a few more. We've just... No? Okay. I'm just trying to diversify the viewpoints, but I will continue with the men-to-men, and then I'll come to you in the back, okay?
Okay. Good morning. A special olá to Secretária Virginia de Angelis from Portugal, Planap. Your intervention was very inspiring, especially the participation, such a wide participation. I had the feeling that you mentioned the medium-term plan, but then you were going to mention also your longer-term plan, which was Strategy 2050. If you could share that with us, that would be very interesting.
Great. That's a very specific question there for Virginia, so we'll come back to that, Virginia, in a moment. And then a final comment from the floor then. You're making eye contact with me. Yes, you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. My name is Mikko Ollikainen. I'm a member of parliament in Finland. And thank you for the presentations. I will ask about the supercraft in the future. What is the supercraft for a young people who are right now they are like 10 years old or don't even born? So what is the supercraft for them in the future? Actually, we have challenges with mental health care and marginalization, but the positive way we have to see. Thank you.
Forgive me, I'm not familiar with the terminology supercraft. Can you just elaborate very briefly?
Skills, super skills.
There we go. We got there. Thank you so much for that. Every day is a school day. On that one. Thank you. So we've got a variety of different topics. The importance of strategic foresight. I'm going to frame a question from the gentleman here. This importance of national visions. It's very rare to have countries with visions. So how do we kind of incorporate long-term visions into national dialogues and strategies? The importance of young people, tokenism, but also communication. I think there was something in that. That particular question to Virginia on Strategy 2050 and super skills. What are they and how do we support young people? We could have another hour on each of those subjects. I'm going to turn to you first, Pia, because I think that your work actually covers a variety of those areas. So maybe briefly respond if you can.
Okay, selectively, because I'm not the best person to reply to the foresight question. But of course, I mean, as I already said, because Bernard and the colleagues are sitting here in the room, and they could probably also explain for hours, what we need in the strategy in terms of foresight tools. But for sure, we need foresight tools to be part of this strategy, as it is already part of, the policy creation that you're yourself involved in, because you ask the question, but from the definition, the scoping, to the vision, to the strategy, and then, of course, to the follow-up, because we can only do this if we apply foresight thinking to policy making on intergenerational fairness and actually mainstream foresight into all the policies that are going to contribute to build intergenerational fairness. So I think while this is not very precise and, on the method and so forth, but this we can discuss. And again, the strategy is in the making, so the strategy is not written yet. We certainly do need foresight.
Because we've got minutes each, I think, on these contributions.
Yes,
on the young people
let me be telegraphic. I think I talked already about young people. You were talking about the super skill. I mentioned already critical thinking, which I see as a very, very important skill. I've just discussed it a lot this morning on citizenship, education. I think it also applies here. But of course, I mean, the whole being educated to participate in decisions, and being able to, run when you can walk, means that we need to start with education. So that would be, of course, you would not be surprised to hear me say that. That would be a very important thing to do, to educate, actually, to think intergenerationally.
And that lifelong learning point as well, very briefly.
And that lifelong, and very quickly, how do we represent people who are already born? I think we also replied to that. We have proxies, in young people. But we have to think about this, what is the best way to do that, to look and indeed to look after their interest. Let me stop there, but not without saying that I think, and Virginia made it powerfully, that point, instilling hope you know, I think is a very, very important part of what we are trying to do here, you know, and basically avoid, you know, this political disillusionment that we also see with young generations. So, I mean, that's great, and cooperation then between the generations today to look after the interests of the generations of the future. I think
the importance of hope and working intergenerationally. You can see what I'm doing, and apologies for doing it. But I'm going to move us to Virginia on the question regarding the vision, and maybe coupling it with the question or the reflection from Malta about having a national vision that you're collectively working towards. Virginia.
Okay, thank you for the questions. Talking about the Brazil 2050 strategy can encompass the answers for all other questions. We have the challenge of creating urgency in action, and to that, and also to improve trust regarding public institutions, political institutions, and the challenge of continuity, because we suffer from the political cycles, and that's okay, because that's democratic life, and we must be used to that. And how to overcome these challenges? We try to create a coherent and integrated vision. We try to engage public and non-public stakeholders in diversity, including youth, the private sector, academia, governments from all the states. And also we have the challenge, and we are trying to promote synchronization amongst different plans and financial instruments and views. And for that, foresight is was a key tool. Why? Because it informs political decisions, it brings evidence to decisions, to formulation, and also to implementation, because we have this challenge of implementation, of enhancing collaboration and cooperation amongst different stakeholders. Another second pillar for the Brazil strategy is the social participation. So we directly involved over than 4,000 people, technical, government, public servants, scientists, but not only this. Through the digital platform, we could involve the whole society and youth. Youth was instigated and really stimulated to be engaged in this process. And also
It's as if the timings knew that we were up against it. Virginia, we are going to have to bring that reflection to an end. Apologies, we'd lost you there for a second with technology.
No problem. Okay, I complete in the end. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. We are at time. I'm not looking to the MC to my right, because I know that there is probably an indication that we're over. Yes, there is. There'll be an opportunity to share some further reflections over lunch, particularly with Pieter, who's here in the room with us. My thanks to all panelists. My apologies that I didn't have the opportunity to come back to you in Spain, but appreciating that I was very keen to get as many questions or reflections from the floor. To end then, as you walk towards your lunch, and those joining online to do the same, that message of hope. We say in Welsh, gwnewch y pethau bychain, byddwch lawen. Do the small things, keep the faith, and keep the joy. And I'm hoping that gives you some reflection over lunch as well. But if I can ask you to thank our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Jacob, and to our other panelists.
Thank you.
For a session that, I think has a little bit of hope in it. We break for lunch. Please come back at 2 o'clock sharp. And we look forward to seeing those of you joining us online back then too. Thank you so much. Bon appétit.